Story 1. The Loop on Highway 82. Marcus Chen had been driving 18-wheelers for 17 years, hauling freight across the American Midwest with the kind of steady reliability that made dispatchers love him. He knew every truck stop, every way station, and every shortcut between Chicago and... On the night of October 14, 2019, he picked up a load of industrial machinery in Springfield, Illinois, destined for a factory outside Little Rock, Arkansas. The route was simple. Take Highway 82 west through Missouri, cut through the Ozarks, and deliver by... Marcus had driven this exact route 43 times before. He knew it like the back of his weathered hands. The evening started normally enough. Marcus fueled up at the Flying J just outside Springfield, grabbed 2 thermoses of black coffee and a turkey sandwich, and merged onto Highway 2 at exactly 9:47 p.m. The October air was crisp, and a thin fog had begun settling over the rural farmland that stretched endlessly on both sides of the 2-lane highway. His CB radio crackled with the usual chatter from other drivers, complaints about dodgers, warnings about speed traps near Versailles, the typical background noise of the trucking life. Marcus adjusted his seat, turned up his favorite Johnny Cash playlist, and settled in for what should have been an 8-hour haul. Around 11:30 p.m., he passed through the small town of Hermitage, Missouri, population 437 according to the faded sign. He remembered because he always noted this particular landmark. It meant he was making good time. The town consisted of a shuttered gas station, a handful of darkened houses, and a small church with a white steeple barely visible through the thickening fog. Marcus glanced at his GPS. 287 miles to Little Rock, estimated arrival 5:43 a.m. Perfect. He'd have time to unload, grab breakfast, and maybe catch a few hours of sleep before his next dispatch. 30 minutes past Hermitage, Marcus noticed something odd. The mile markers seemed wrong. He just passed mile marker 156, but the fog had grown so dense that he couldn't quite make out the numbers on the next marker he passed. The GPS showed him still on Highway 82, but the estimated arrival time had changed to 5:51 a.m., 8 minutes longer than a moment ago, even though he'd been maintaining a steady 65 miles per hour. Marcus rubbed his eyes, thinking maybe fatigue was playing him. He'd been awake since 6 a.m., but 17 years on the road had conditioned him to longer hauls than this. Then he saw the church again. The same white steeple, the same darkened houses, the same shuttered gas station. The same faded sign, Hermitage, Missouri, population 437. Marcus felt his stomach tight. That was impossible. He'd been driving west for 40 minutes since passing through Hermitage the first time. There was no way he'd circled back. Highway 82 was a straight shot through this part of Missouri, no loops, no turnoffs he could have accidentally taken. He checked his GPS again. It showed him on Highway 82 heading west, 287 miles from Little Rock, the exact same distance as 40 minutes ago. Marcus grabbed his CB radio. "Breaker, breaker, this is Black Knight, anybody copy?" Static answered him. He tried again. "This is Black Knight on Highway 82 westbound, looking for a radio check, anybody out there?" Nothing but the hiss of dead air. His hands tightened on the steering wheel. In 17 years, the CB had never been completely silent. There were always drivers out there, always someone talking, complaining, warning, joking, always. He decided to stop in Hermitage this time to figure out what was happening. But as he approached the town limits, his truck simply wouldn't slow down. Marcus pressed the brake pedal. It felt normal. The resistance was correct. But his speedometer remained locked at exactly 65 miles per hour. He pressed harder, then stood on the brake with both feet. The pedal went to the floor, but the truck maintained its speed as if he'd done nothing at all. Panic crept up his spine like cold fingers. He tried downshifting, but the gear lever wouldn't move. He tried turning the steering wheel to pull over, but it was locked dead straight ahead. Marcus was a passenger in his own truck, and he was driving through Hermitage for the second time. The town slid past his windows in the fog, identical to before. Same shuttered gas station, same darkened houses, same church with the white steeple. But this time Marcus noticed something he'd missed before. In front of the church, illuminated by a single streetlight cutting through the fog, stood a figure. A woman in a white dress, perfectly still, watching his truck pass. Her face was too far away to make out clearly, but Marcus felt her eyes on him with absolute certainty. 29 minutes later, he passed through Hermitage again. The woman was still there in the exact same position, wearing the exact same white dress. Marcus watched his odometer. It was rolling normally. Miles traveled, but those miles were taking him nowhere. His fuel gauge hadn't moved. His GPS showed the same distance to Little Rock, 287 miles. The clock on his dashboard read 12:38 a.m., but his phone showed 12:09 a.m. Time itself wasn't agreeing with itself anymore. He tried the CB again. This time he heard something. Not voices, a sound like breathing, low and rhythmic, as if something large was sleeping on every channel. Marcus quickly turned it off. The silence in the cab was worse than the breathing. He could hear his own heartbeat, the whisper of his tires on asphalt, and underneath it all, something else. A low humming that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, vibrating through the truck's frame. Fourth time through Hermitage, 1:07 a.m. according to his dashboard, 12:09 a.m. according to his phone. The woman in white had moved. She was now standing in the middle of Highway 82, directly in his path. Marcus instinctively jerked the steering wheel, and this time it responded. The truck swerved, tires screaming, and Marcus caught a glimpse of her face as he passed within feet of her. It wasn't a face at all. It was a blur, like someone had smeared a photograph, features that wouldn't resolve no matter how hard he looked. The truck straightened itself back onto Highway 82, and Marcus realized he was sweating despite the cab's air conditioning. Fifth time, the woman was gone. The entire town was different. The houses had no doors. The gas station was there but reversed, its sign facing backward. The church steeple was on the wrong side. Everything was slightly wrong, as if he was looking at Hermitage through a distorted mirror. Marcus felt something break inside his mind, the rational part that insisted there had to be an explanation. There was no explanation for this. He was trapped in something that shouldn't exist. Sixth time, multiple figures stood along the roadside. Men, women, children, all in clothes from different eras. A man in a Union Army uniform. A woman in a flapper dress. A child in 1950s clothes holding a toy that Marcus couldn't quite focus on. All of them watching his truck pass. All of them with those blurred, unresolved faces. Marcus screamed, but no sound came out. His voice was gone, stolen by whatever this place was. Seventh time, the figures were inside the truck. Marcus could see them in his mirrors, sitting in the sleeper compartment behind him. He didn't turn around. He couldn't turn around. If he looked directly at them, something terrible would happen. He knew this with the certainty of instinct. His phone was glitching now, showing times that hadn't existed yet. 3:47 a.m., 9:23 p.m., 16:88 p.m. Impossible numbers. The GPS was showing him in places he'd never been. Coordinates in the ocean, coordinates in the Arctic, coordinates that didn't exist on Earth. Eighth time through Hermitage, Marcus noticed his own truck parked at the shuttered gas station. He was looking at himself, driving through town, staring out the window with an expression of abject terror. The loop was layering on top of itself. He was seeing his previous iterations, all trapped here together, all driving through Hermitage forever. Ninth time, Marcus stopped trying to escape. He accepted it. The moment he accepted it, something changed. The figures in his mirrors faded. The humming stopped. His controls responded again. He pressed the brake and the truck slowed. He pulled over to the side of Highway 82, right at the Hermitage town limits, and turned off the engine. In the sudden silence, Marcus heard a voice. It came from everywhere, soft and neither male nor female. "You may leave now. The toll is paid." He didn't question it. He started the engine, pulled back onto Highway 82 and drove west. The fog began to lift. His GPS showed him making progress again, 286 miles to Little Rock, then 285, then 284. His phone and dashboard clock finally agreed, 2:33 a.m. He never passed through Hermitage again that night. In fact, when he looked for it on the return trip 3 days later, Hermitage wasn't there. Highway 82 ran straight through empty farmland where the town should have been. Marcus searched online. Hermitage, Missouri, had burned to the ground in 1952. All 437 residents had died in a single night. The cause was never determined. The town was never rebuilt. According to every map made after 1952, there was no town called Hermitage on Highway 82, but Marcus had driven through it 9 times in a single night. He had the timestamp on his dashcam to prove it, though the footage showed only fog and an empty highway. Never the town, never the figures. Just Marcus behind the wheel screaming without sound. Marcus Chen still drives trucks. He still runs routes through Missouri. But he plans his trips carefully now, always making sure he passes through that particular stretch of Highway 82 during daylight hours. Even so, sometimes in his mirrors, just for a moment, he sees them. The figures in clothes from different eras, standing at the roadside, watching, waiting for another driver who doesn't know about the toll on Highway 82, waiting for someone else to join the loop. Story 2. The Thing in the Load. Rebecca Thornton had been hauling refrigerated trailers for 9 years, specializing in long-distance food transport across the Canadian prairies and into the northern United States. On March 3, 2021, she picked up a load at a meat processing facility outside Winnipeg, Manitoba. 16 pallets of frozen beef destined for a distribution center in Fargo, North Dakota. The paperwork was standard. The load was sealed and temperature verified, and Rebecca had hauled this exact route dozens of times before. She was a professional, meticulous about pre-trip inspections and maintenance. Her Kenworth T680 was only 2 years old, and she treated it better than most people treated their homes. The pickup was scheduled for 6 p.m., right as winter darkness was settling over Winnipeg. March in Manitoba meant temperatures still hovering around -15°C, with occasional snow squalls that could turn highways into skating rinks. Rebecca dressed appropriately. Thermal layers, insulated boots, heavy gloves. She completed her inspection of the trailer, checked that the refrigeration unit was running at the required -18°C, and verified the seal number against her paperwork. JK 447,293. Everything matched. She signed the bills of lading, climbed into her cab, and pulled out of the facility at 6:34 p.m. The route was simple. Take Highway 75 south from Winnipeg, cross the border at Emerson, Pembina, and continue straight down to Fargo. 3 hours of driving, maybe 4 if the border was slow. Rebecca settled into her seat, adjusted her mirrors, and turned on her audiobook, a thriller about a detective hunting a serial killer. The irony of what came later wasn't lost on her. Highway 75 was quiet that night. A few passenger vehicles heading south, one other semi that passed her going north, and mostly empty roads stretching ahead into the darkness. The snow had held off, leaving just a light dusting on the shoulders. Rebecca maintained a steady 90 kilometers per hour, well within the safe range for the conditions. Her reefer unit hummed steadily behind her, the sound as familiar as her own breathing after 9 years of hauling refrigerated load. About 40 kilometers south of Winnipeg, somewhere near the town of Morris, Rebecca heard something that made her turn down her audiobook. A sound was coming from the trailer. Not the normal creaks and groans of a load shifting. This was different. It sounded like tapping, rhythmic, deliberate tapping, as if someone was knocking on the inside of the trailer wall. Rebecca's first thought was that something had come loose. Maybe a pallet had shifted and was now banging against the wall. It happened sometimes, especially if the load hadn't been secured properly. But she'd watched the warehouse crew strap down those pallets herself. Everything had been tight, professional by the book. Still, she pulled over at the next turnout about 5 kilometers down the road. It was a small rest area with no facilities, just a place for vehicles to pull off the highway. She grabbed her flashlight and climbed down from the cab. The night was bitterly cold, her breath fogging immediately. The reefer unit was running normally, the temperature gauge showing -18 Celsius exactly. Rebecca walked along the length of the trailer, listening. The tapping had stopped. She knocked on the trailer wall with her gloved fist. The sound echoed dully. Everything seemed normal. The seal was still intact. JK 447,293, exactly as it should be. She couldn't open the trailer without breaking the seal, and breaking a seal without authorization was grounds for losing her job, not to mention the potential legal issues if anything was wrong with the load. Rebecca convinced herself it had been the cold making the metal contract, or her imagination playing tricks after too many hours of driving. She climbed back into the cab and continued south. The tapping didn't resume. She crossed through the small towns of St. Jean-Baptiste and Letelier without incident, the highway stretching empty and white ahead of her. The border was only 20 kilometers away now. Then her CB radio crackled to life. "Northbound reefer, you got a problem." The voice was another trucker, female, matter of fact. Rebecca grabbed her mic. "This is southbound reefer, go ahead." A pause then. "You got something on top of your trailer. Looks like, I don't know what it looks like. But there's something up there." Rebecca felt ice that had nothing to do with the weather form in her stomach. "Say again, something on my trailer." Another pause, longer this time. Then, "Forget it, maybe it was just shadows, stay safe out there." The radio went silent. Rebecca checked her mirrors obsessively, but she couldn't see the top of her own trailer from the cab. Whatever the other driver had seen, if she'd seen anything, was above Rebecca's line of sight. The tapping started again. Louder this time, more insistent. Not random banging, but a deliberate pattern. 3 taps, pause, 3 taps, pause, 3 taps. Rebecca's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Something was wrong with this load, something beyond shifted pallets or contracting metal. The pattern continued, regular as a heartbeat, as she approached the border crossing. The Emerson Pembina port of entry was quiet that night. Rebecca pulled into the commercial lane, her truck one of only 3 waiting to cross. She handed her paperwork to the Canadian border officer, trying to keep her voice steady. "Everything okay tonight?" the officer asked, routine question. Rebecca almost told him about the tapping, about what the other driver had said, but what would she say? That she heard noises in a sealed trailer. That someone claimed to see something on top. She'd sound crazy. They might delay her for hours, inspect the entire load and find nothing but frozen beef. She'd lose the delivery window and face consequences from her company. "Everything's fine," Rebecca heard herself say. The officer waved her through. The American side was equally quick, a brief check of her paperwork, a few questions about her cargo, and she was cleared to proceed. Rebecca drove south onto U.S. Highway 29, the American continuation of Highway 75. Fargo was 90 minutes away. The tapping changed. It was no longer coming from the trailer walls. It was coming from directly above the cab on the roof of the sleeper compartment. Steady, deliberate, 3 taps, pause, 3 taps. Something was on top of her truck, something that had traveled across an international border without either customs agency seeing it. Rebecca's breath came faster. She tried the CB again. "Anyone southbound on 29, this is northbound reefer." She stopped. She was southbound, not northbound. Her mind wasn't working right. The fear was scrambling her thoughts. "This is southbound reefer. Does anyone copy?" Static answered her. Not even the background chatter that usually filled the CB. Just empty static. The tapping continued, and now Rebecca could feel it through the seat, vibrations traveling through the truck's frame. Whatever was up there was heavy. She looked at her passenger mirror and screamed. There was a hand hanging down from the roof of the cab. A pale, grayish hand with fingers too long, nails too dark, hanging just at the edge of her peripheral vision. As she watched, it slowly curled upward and disappeared back onto the roof. The tapping stopped. The silence was somehow worse. Rebecca did the only thing she could think of. She waited. The Kenworth responded, speed climbing past 90 kilometers per hour, past 100, past 120. The highway was straight and empty, and Rebecca pushed the truck faster than she'd ever driven a loaded semi. If she could get to Fargo, to the distribution center, to people and lights and witnesses, this would end. It had to end. But something was happening to the truck. The steering felt wrong, sluggish, as if the vehicle was fighting her. The engine temperature gauge began climbing, slowly but steadily. The reefer unit's temperature alarm started beeping. The trailer was warming up, already at -15 Celsius and rising. Systems were failing without cause, without explanation. Then she saw them in her headlights. Figures standing on the side of the highway, appearing and disappearing in the darkness between road reflectors. They looked like people, but wrong, too tall, too thin, movements too fluid. They watched her truck pass, heads turning in perfect unison. There were dozens of them, then hundreds, lining both sides of Highway 29 as far as her headlights could reach. Rebecca's phone rang. She didn't recognize the number, but she answered anyway, desperate for any human connection. "Hello," she said, her voice breaking. Breathing came through the speaker. Not human breathing, too deep, too rhythmic, the same pattern as the tapping. 3 breaths in, pause, 3 breaths in, pause. Then a voice, layered and wrong, multiple voices speaking in harmony. "We rode with the cattle. We crossed with the cattle. We are in the cattle. We are the cattle." The phone went dead. Rebecca looked at the trailer in her mirror and saw something that ended whatever rational thought she had left. The trailer was moving, not swaying from the road, moving as if breathing, the metal sides expanding and contracting rhythmically. The refrigeration unit was dead now, temperature gauge showing +5 Celsius and climbing fast. Whatever was in that trailer was thawing. Whatever was in that trailer was waking up. The figures on the roadside were closer now, some of them standing on the highway itself. Rebecca swerved around them, but there were too many. One passed through her headlights close enough for her to see it clearly. It had too many joints in its limbs. Its head was on backward. Its mouth was opening vertically instead of horizontally. And from that mouth came the same layered voice. "We rode with the cattle." Rebecca grabbed her CB, screaming into it now. "Mayday, mayday, this is..." She couldn't remember her call sign. She couldn't remember her own name. The fear had eaten everything except the desperate need to survive. "Someone help me, there's something on my truck, there's load, someone please help me." A voice answered, male, calm, professional. "Reefer unit southbound on 29, slow down and proceed to mile marker 156. There's a way station, pull in and wait. Do not open your trailer, do not leave your cab, we're coming." The voice was normal, human, real. Rebecca almost cried with relief. Mile marker 156 appeared. The way station was there, lights on, the scales visible. Rebecca pulled in, following the instructions to the letter. She parked, set her air brakes, and sat in her cab, engine running, doors locked. The tapping on the roof had become pounding now. The trailer was rocking on its suspension. Through her mirror, she could see something dark leaking from the trailer's door seals, running down the back doors in thick streams. 2 black SUVs pulled into the way station, followed by a large box truck. Men in unmarked uniforms got out, wearing what looked like hazmat suits. They worked quickly, professionally, saying nothing. They attached some kind of device to Rebecca's trailer, and she heard a high-pitched whine that made her teeth ache. The pounding on her cab roof stopped immediately. The rocking trailer went still. One of the men approached her cab. He made a gesture. "Roll down your window." Rebecca complied. "Ma'am, I need you to step out of the truck and come with us. Leave everything, your phone, your bags, everything. Just come with us right now." His voice was kind but firm. Rebecca obeyed, her legs barely holding her as she climbed down. They led her to one of the SUVs and drove away. Rebecca watched through the rear window as more vehicles arrived at the weigh station, surrounding her truck and trailer. The last thing she saw before they turned onto the highway was a bright flash, like a camera going off, but much larger. Then they were driving north, back toward the Canadian border. Rebecca woke up in a hotel room in Grand Forks. 3 days had passed. Her truck was in the hotel parking lot, cleaned, serviced, and perfectly maintained. Her trailer was gone. The men in the SUV, who she learned worked for some government agency they wouldn't name, told her the load had been compromised by a refrigeration failure. The meat had spoiled. The entire trailer had been condemned and destroyed. She would be compensated for the lost time and given a new trailer. There would be no negative marks on her record. In fact, there would be no record of the trip at all. The bills of lading, the customs documentation, all of it had disappeared. They asked her questions for hours. What had she seen? What had she heard? What had she felt? Rebecca told them. They wrote it all down, their faces expressionless. When she finished, one of them said, "You did everything right. You followed the instructions. You survived. Not everyone does." Then they left. Rebecca Thornton still drives trucks. She still hauls refrigerated loads, but now she checks something else before accepting a job. She asks where the load originated, where it was processed, what exactly is being transported, and if anything feels wrong, if the paperwork is too vague, if the facility seems off, if the seal number contains certain digit sequences that she's learned to recognize, she refuses the job. Her company doesn't question her refusals anymore. They know. They don't talk about it, but they know. Because sometimes the loads aren't what they claim to be. Sometimes something else rides with the cattle. Something that waits in the cold and dark, patient and hungry for a driver who doesn't know to refuse. Rebecca learned this on March 3, 2021 on Highway 75 south of Winnipeg. She learned it and she survived. The tapping still visits her dreams, though. 3 taps, pause, 3 taps, pause. She wakes up checking the ceiling of her sleeper cab, making sure nothing is there, making sure nothing rode along. But sometimes, just sometimes, she hears it. And she knows she won't be the last driver they try to use. The things in the loads are always hungry, always patient, always waiting for the next truck. Story 3. The radio station that exists. James Parker had been driving long haul for 22 years, crisscrossing America's highways with the kind of weathered competence that came from 2 decades behind the wheel. On August 19, 2018, he was hauling auto parts from Detroit, Michigan to Denver, Colorado, a route that would take him through the heart of the Midwest and across the Great Plains. James preferred night driving, less traffic, cooler temperatures, and a certain peace that came with having the road mostly to himself. He left Detroit at 8 p.m., planning to drive straight through with only fuel and rest stops, arriving in Denver within 36 hours. His truck was a 2015 Freightliner Cascadia, reliable and comfortable, equipped with a modern stereo system that James had upgraded himself. He was particular about his music and podcasts, with carefully curated playlists for different stretches of highway. But James was old school in one respect. He loved scanning the AM dial, finding those distant stations that came in clear at night, when atmospheric conditions bounced radio signals across hundreds of miles. There was something nostalgic about it, hearing a talk show from Nebraska while driving through Indiana, catching a farm report from Kansas while crossing Illinois. Around 2:30 a.m., somewhere on Interstate 80 between Iowa City and Des Moines, James finished the audiobook he'd been listening to and decided to scan the AM dial. The Iowa night was clear and cold, perfect conditions for long-distance radio reception. He slowly turned the dial, passing through the usual suspects: conservative talk radio, farm reports, classic country stations, evangelical preachers promising salvation. At 13:20 a.m., right between a sports talk station and a religious broadcaster, he found something different. The voice was male, middle-aged, with a neutral American accent that could have been from anywhere. The tone was conversational, intimate, as if the host was speaking directly to James alone. And we're back here on Night Signals, taking your calls about the roads less traveled. For those just joining us, we're talking about the highways, the byways, the strange places we find ourselves when the sun goes down and the world gets quiet. Our number is 1-800-555-NIGHT if you'd like to share your story. James had never heard of Night Signals, but it sounded interesting, exactly the kind of program he enjoyed during long night drives. He kept the dial there and continued west. The host introduced himself only as Marcus, no last name given. The current caller was a woman describing a stretch of Highway 50 in Nevada where her GPS had stopped working, and she'd gotten lost for hours despite the road being perfectly straight. Marcus listened intently, asking thoughtful questions, never dismissing or mocking her experience. What struck James as odd was that every caller seemed to be calling about highways at night. Every single story involved strange occurrences, unexplained phenomena, disturbing encounters. A man who'd seen a hitchhiker vanish from his passenger seat on I-40. A woman who'd driven through a town that her GPS insisted didn't exist. A trucker who'd watched his own truck pass him going the opposite direction, with himself visible in the driver's seat. Marcus treated every story seriously, knowingly, as if these experiences were not just believable but expected. James found himself drawn in, listening as caller after caller shared their stories. The show had no commercials, no station identification beyond the name Night Signals, no news breaks or weather reports. Just Marcus and his caller talking about the strange things that happened on America's highways after dark. James checked his phone to look up the show, but he had no signal out here in rural Iowa. He made a mental note to search for it later. Around 3:45 a.m., during a lull between callers, Marcus said something that made James's hands tighten on the steering wheel. "I want to give a special acknowledgement to our listeners out there tonight on I-80 in Iowa. I know several of you are with us right now, heading west through the darkness. The highway is quiet tonight, isn't it? Just you and the road and this voice in your cab. Remember, you're never truly alone out there. We're always broadcasting, always listening." James looked around instinctively as if he might see other trucks nearby, other drivers listening to the same station. But I-80 stretched empty in both directions, his headlights cutting a lonely path through the darkness. How did Marcus know he had listeners specifically on I-80 in Iowa? It was possible, of course. The show could have a large audience, and statistically, some of them would be on this highway. But the specificity felt wrong, too targeted. The next caller identified himself as a driver on I-80 westbound, just past the Newton exit. James had passed the Newton exit 20 minutes ago. The caller's voice was familiar in an unsettling way. The accent, the cadence, the slight gravelly quality. The caller was telling a story about hearing a radio show that predicted his location, a show that seemed to know where he was driving. Marcus listened patiently, then said, "And how does that make you feel, knowing you're being watched?" Or perhaps listened to would be more accurate. James realized why the caller's voice was familiar. It sounded like his own voice, or close enough to make his skin crawl. He grabbed his CB radio mic, clicking it on. "Breaker, breaker, any drivers on I-80 westbound, you got a copy?" A female voice responded immediately. "This is westbound on 80, go ahead," James asked. "You listening to AM radio right now? Station around 1320, a pause then. Negative, driver. "I'm on satellite radio. Why do you ask?" James made up an excuse about looking for a good station and signed off. He turned his attention back to 13:20 a.m. Marcus was speaking directly to the caller who sounded like James. "So you're starting to understand now. The thing about night signals is that we're not just broadcasting to you. We're broadcasting from you. Every driver out there in the dark, every lonely traveler on an empty highway, you're all transmitting. Your fears, your experiences, your stories. We just collect them and send out. You're listening to yourself, friend. You're listening to everyone like you." The caller, the one who sounded like James, asked the question James was thinking. What is this show?" Marcus laughed, a sound without warmth. "We're the frequency between stations, the signal and the static. We've been here as long as there have been highways and radios. We're what fills the empty spaces of the American night. And we're very, very interested in drivers like you. Drivers who listen. Drivers who pay attention." James reached for the dial to change the station, but his hand froze. He couldn't look away from the road. Traffic had appeared out of nowhere. Dozens of vehicles surrounded him on I-80, all of them older model cars and trucks, 20 or 30 years old at least. They maintained perfect spacing, moving at exactly his speed. James tried to slow down, but his cruise control wouldn't disengage. He tried to speed up, but the accelerator didn't respond. He was locked at 72 miles per hour, surrounded by vehicles that shouldn't be there. Marcus's voice continued. "Don't fight it, James. Yes, I know your name. I know everything about you. 22 years driving, originally from Portland, divorced twice, 3 children you don't see enough. You hauled furniture before switching to auto parts. You prefer night driving because the darkness feels safer than the day. But you're wrong about that. The darkness is when we're strongest." Every vehicle surrounding James was empty. He could see into the cars nearest him. No drivers, no passengers, just empty seats and steering wheels moving by themselves. The trucks had no one in their cabs. They were ghost vehicles, impossible vehicles, pacing him on I-80 in the Iowa darkness. "Here's what's going to happen, James." Marcus's voice was closer now, as if he was in the cab, sitting right beside James. "You're going to keep driving. You're going to listen to night signals for the next 6 hours, and you're going to learn things. Things about the highways that most drivers never learn. Things about what moves on these roads when the rest of the world is sleeping. Consider it an education." The ghost vehicle stayed with him. James watched his GPS. He was making normal progress, the mile markers passing at the expected rate. But the world outside his windows had become strange. The exits off I-80 led to places with names that weren't on any map. Ashwood Junction, Gray Haven, Stillwater Crossing. Towns that shouldn't exist. The few buildings he could see in the darkness were wrong architecture from different eras mixed together. Victorian houses next to brutalist concrete structures. Frontier-style wooden buildings beside steel towers. Marcus narrated it all. "You're seeing the real America now, James. The one that exists in the spaces between. Every highway has a shadow version. Every route has an alternate path. Most drivers never see it. They stay on the surface world, the normal world. But a few, like you, get pulled down into the underneath. Don't worry, most of you make it back. Most." The callers to night signals were becoming more disturbing. A woman described watching her truck drive itself while she sat paralyzed in the passenger seat. A man talked about seeing his future self lying dead beside the highway. A person whose voice was layered and multiplied, as if many people were speaking in unison, described a truck stop where all the customers were the same person, duplicated hundreds of times. Marcus listened to every story with the same calm interest, occasionally asking questions, offering observations that suggested deep familiarity with these experiences. Around 5 a.m., James noticed something that finally broke his paralysis. The fuel gauge on his truck hadn't moved. He'd been driving for over 6 hours since Des Moines, at highway speed with a full load, but the gauge still showed 3/4 full, exactly where it had been when he'd first tuned to 13:20 a.m. Time was passing. Miles were accumulating on his odometer, but fuel wasn't being consumed. The laws of physics had become negotiable. "Of course your fuel isn't decreasing," Marcus said, responding to a thought James hadn't spoken aloud. "You're not moving through normal space anymore. You're between spaces, between moments, between what is and what might be. The roads you're driving on exist in 1,000 different Americas, all layered on top of each other. You're experiencing all of them at once." The ghost vehicles were changing. Some of them were becoming more real, drivers appearing in previously empty seats. But the drivers weren't human, or weren't entirely human. James caught glimpses of faces that had too many eyes or no eyes at all. Bodies that bent in directions bodies shouldn't bend. A pickup truck pulled alongside him, and the thing in the driver's seat turned to look at him. Its head was a television screen showing static, but James could feel it watching him through the white noise. "They're curious about you," Marcus explained. "It's not often someone from your layer of reality crosses over while still conscious. Usually it happens during those moments of highway hypnosis, when you suddenly realize you've driven 20 miles with no memory of it. Those gaps in memory are slipping between the layers. But you're fully aware right now, James, fully present. That makes you fascinating to them." James found his voice. "Let me go. Let me out of this." Marcus laughed again. "You think I'm keeping you here, James. I'm the only thing keeping you safe. Without night signals to guide you, you'd be completely lost in the underneath. The things sharing the road with you right now would pull you apart just to see what you're made of. They'd wear your skin like a coat and drive your truck for the sheer novelty of it. I'm broadcasting a protection frequency. As long as you're listening to my voice, you're under night signals protection. Change the station and see what happens." James didn't change the station. They drove on, James and the ghost vehicles and the things pretending to be vehicles. The sun should have been rising, but the darkness continued. The dashboard clock was spinning randomly, showing impossible times. 26, 83, 14, 92, 3, 00, 88, 12. His phone had stopped working hours ago, frozen on a screen that showed his GPS location as the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. Marcus took more calls. The stories became worse. A trucker described his load coming alive and eating its way out of the trailer. A driver talked about a passenger who had appeared in her cab and wouldn't leave, growing larger each time she looked at it. Someone called in crying, saying he'd been driving the same mile of highway for 3 days, unable to reach the next exit. Marcus offered advice to each caller. "Keep driving, don't stop. Don't leave the cab. Don't accept help from other vehicles. Stay on the frequency." "The highway has rules," Marcus said during another lull. "Most of them are unspoken, but they're absolute. Don't pick up hitchhikers after midnight. Don't stop at rest areas where you're the only vehicle. Don't drive through fog if you can see lights moving inside it. Never answer a CB call that comes from your own truck. Don't leave the highway if all the exits start having the same name. And most importantly, James, never, and I mean never, stop listening to night signals once you've tuned in. The frequency is a lifeline. It's the only thing connecting you back to the world you came from." James drove through landscapes that shouldn't exist, forests made of metal trees, cities that were upside down, buildings hanging from the sky, stretches of highway where the road itself was transparent, showing an infinite drop below. His truck had no problems with any of it. The wheels found traction on the invisible road. The steering responded normally. The engine never faltered. It was as if himself had accepted this new reality. "You're doing well, James," Marcus said. "Better than most. Some drivers panic. They try to stop, try to get out, try to run. That never ends well. The underneath doesn't respond well to fear. It feeds on it, actually. Your calm is keeping you safe. Keep that up for another hour and you'll be through." An hour. James could do an hour. He focused on driving, on maintaining his speed, on breathing steadily. The ghost vehicles began to fade, returning to their empty states, then disappearing entirely. The landscape outside became more normal: ordinary Iowa farmland, ordinary highway, ordinary darkness. The dashboard clock stabilized, showing 6:47 a.m. The sun was finally rising, pink and gold on the eastern horizon. "There you go," Marcus said, his voice warm now, almost proud. "You're coming back to the surface. Few more minutes and you'll be completely back in normal space. Your fuel gauge will catch up with reality. It's going to drop to about a quarter tank all at once, so don't be alarmed. Your phone will work again. The other drivers on the road will be real, and night signals will fade out. You won't be able to find us again, not on 1320 AM or any other frequency. We only broadcast to specific people at specific times." James wanted to ask 1,000 questions, but his throat was too dry. Marcus continued, "You survived your first crossing, James. Congratulations. Most drivers who experience the underneath don't realize what happened. You'll remember everything. That's my gift to you. Knowledge, use it. The highways are thinner than people think. The barriers between normal and not normal are fragile. You'll see signs of it now, things you would have dismissed before. Pay attention. Stay alert. And James, if you ever hear night signals again, don't turn the dial. It means you're crossing over again and you'll need my guidance to get back." The signal started to fade, static creeping in, Marcus's voice becoming distant. James's fuel gauge suddenly dropped to a quarter tank, exactly as predicted. His phone came back to life with a dozen notifications. The GPS showed him on I-80 westbound, approaching the exit for Adair, Iowa. Everything was normal. Everything was real. But James Parker wasn't the same. He completed his delivery to Denver without incident. He returned to Detroit and took a week off. During that week, he researched night signals obsessively. There was no record of any radio show by that name. No Marcus hosting late-night calls about strange highways. The FCC had no license for any station at 1320 AM where he'd been driving. The frequency was officially empty, unused. James still drives long haul. 22 years has become 26 years. But now he keeps a journal of the strange things he sees, the exits that don't quite match his atlas, the mile markers that appear in the wrong order, the vehicles he passes that his eyes can't quite focus on. And sometimes, late at night, he slowly scans the AM dial, not hoping to find night signals again, praying he doesn't, because Marcus was right. James sees it now. The highways are thinner than anyone realizes, and something is always watching from the underneath, waiting for drivers to slip through. James learned this on August 19, 2018, somewhere between 2:30 AM and 6:47 AM, during 4 hours that were also 6 hours, on a stretch of I-80 that was and wasn't in Iowa. He learned it from a radio station that doesn't exist, broadcasting on a frequency that should be empty, hosted by a man who isn't a man, guiding drivers through a version of America that exists in the spaces between the maps. Night Signals is out there, somewhere on the dial, waiting for its next listener. James just hopes it's never him again. But sometimes in the deepest part of the night, he hears it, just for a moment. Marcus's voice, warm and knowing, saying his name. And James keeps driving, eyes forward, hands steady, ignoring the voice that calls from the radio that isn't turned on, ignoring the invitation to cross over again. Because once was enough. Once was more than enough. Story 4. The rest stop at mile 247. Daniel Kovacs had been driving professionally for 14 years, primarily running routes along the East Coast corridor between Maine and Florida. On November 7, 2020, he was hauling electronics from Charlotte, North Carolina, to Richmond, Virginia, a relatively short haul of about 300 miles up Interstate 85 and Interstate 95. Daniel was meticulous about his schedule, his routes, and his stops. He knew every rest area, every truck stop, every way station along his regular paths. This particular route he'd driven at least 60 times before. He left Charlotte at 11 p.m., planning to arrive in Richmond by 6 a.m. the following morning. The November night was mild for the season, temperatures in the low 50s, with clear skies and no weather concerns. Daniel's Volvo VNL was running perfectly, recently serviced and mechanically sound. He was in spirits. This was his last run before a week of vacation, time he planned to spend with his daughter and grandson in Pennsylvania. Everything about the trip was routine. Around 1:30 a.m., Daniel felt the first stirrings of fatigue. He'd been up since 6 a.m. the previous morning, and even though 14 years had conditioned him to irregular sleep schedules, he knew better than to push when his body was telling him to rest. Professional drivers understood that fatigue was as dangerous as drunk driving. Daniel looked for his usual stop, a large truck stop near the Virginia-North Carolina border, where he typically took a 30-minute power nap and grabbed coffee. But as he watched the mile markers, he realized he was passing his usual stop. Somehow he'd missed it, driven right past without noticing. That was unlike him, but fatigue could do that, create gaps in attention. Daniel decided to use the next rest area instead. According to his GPS, there was a rest stop at mile marker 247, just 12 miles ahead. He didn't remember a rest area at that location, but highway facilities were occasionally added or moved. Maybe this was a newer one. Mile marker 247 appeared, and sure enough, a blue service sign indicated a rest area in 1 mile. Daniel activated his turn signal and began slowing down. The exit ramp curved off into darkness, illuminated only by his headlights. As he descended the ramp, Daniel noticed the rest area had no lighting, unusual for a highway facility, which were typically lit brightly for safety. He assumed the lights were malfunctioned, or that this was a particularly remote stop with minimal facilities. The rest area parking lot was empty, not just mostly empty, completely empty. No other trucks, no passenger vehicles, no one. The lot was large enough for maybe 20 vehicles, with separate areas for trucks and cars. Daniel pulled his Volvo into the truck section, parking parallel to the concrete barriers that separated the lot from the woods beyond. He set his air brakes and sat for a moment looking around. The rest area had a strange layout. The main building, presumably containing restrooms and vending machines, was set unusually far back from the parking lot, maybe 200 yards away. The structure was dark, no lights visible in any windows. The whole place felt abandoned, but the pavement was in good condition, no cracks or weeds growing through. It looked maintained but unused, an impossible combination. Daniel checked his phone to set an alarm. Minute nap. No signal. That wasn't particularly odd. Rest areas in rural locations often had poor cell coverage. He set the alarm anyway and reclined his seat, planning to sleep quickly and get back on the road. But sleep wouldn't come. Something about this place felt wrong in a way Daniel couldn't articulate. The silence was too complete. No highway noise filtered down from I-85, even though the interstate was less than half a mile away. No wind moved through the trees. No insects chirped. Just absolute silence. Daniel sat up and looked around more carefully. The woods surrounding the rest area were dense, the trees packed tightly together, but they were all the same species, all the same size, as if they'd been planted simultaneously. The uniformity was unnatural. His truck's parking lights cast long shadows across the empty lot, and Daniel found himself staring at those shadows, convinced they were moving when he wasn't looking directly at them. He decided to leave. This stop was making him more uneasy than sleepy, and he could push on to the next town, find a well-lit truck stop with other people around. Daniel reached for the key to start the engine, but his hand froze. Someone was standing at the edge of the parking lot, right where the pavement met the woods. It was a man, or shaped like a man, wearing what looked like a maintenance uniform. He was standing perfectly still, facing Daniel's truck. The parking lights didn't illuminate him well, keeping him in partial shadow, but Daniel could see enough to know the man had been standing there silently, watching. How long had he been there? Since Daniel arrived, before. The man raised one hand and gestured, a clear motion for Daniel to come over. Daniel didn't move. Every instinct he had was screaming not to leave the truck. The man gestured again, more insistently. Daniel grabbed his CB radio mic. "Breaker, breaker, this is a driver at a rest area on I-85 near mile 247. Is anyone familiar with this location?" Static answered, thick and crackling. He tried again. No response except the static. The man was walking toward the truck now. His gait was wrong, too smooth, no natural bob or sway to his movement. He glided more than walked. Daniel made a decision. He turned the key to start the engine, but nothing happened. The Volvo's engine didn't turn over, didn't even click. The battery was dead, impossibly dead, because all the lights were still working. The man reached the driver's side door. He looked up at Daniel, and in the glow from the cab lights, Daniel saw his face. It was blank. Not expressionless, literally blank. No features, just smooth skin, eyes and nose and mouth should be. The blank face tilted slightly, as if the man was examining Daniel despite having no eyes to see with. Daniel's breath came in short gasps. He watched as the featureless man raised his hand and knocked on the door, 3 measured knocks. Then the man spoke, his voice muffled but audible through the glass. "You need to come with me. The rest stop needs to be inspected." The voice came from where a mouth should be, but the blank face didn't move. "All drivers must report to the main building for inspection. Please exit your vehicle." Daniel's training kicked in. He'd taken courses on highway safety, on dealing with potential threats. Rule 1, never leave your vehicle if something feels wrong. "I'm a commercial driver," Daniel called through the closed window. "I don't have to submit to inspection unless it's DOT or law enforcement. Show me identification." The blank-faced man stood silent for a long moment. Then he said, "You're at the rest stop. You stopped here. That means you must comply. Please exit your vehicle." The voice was patient, inhuman in its steadiness. No emotion, no inflection, just words delivered with mechanical precision. "I'm leaving," Daniel said, more to himself than to the man. He tried the key again. Nothing. He checked the battery gauge. It showed full charge. Everything electrical was working except the starter. Daniel grabbed his emergency battery pack, a device designed to jump-start vehicles. As he connected it to the battery terminals, the blank-faced man watched without moving. The engine turned over and started. Daniel nearly sobbed with relief. He slammed the truck into gear and pressed the accelerator. The Volvo lurched forward, and Daniel swung it in a tight arc toward the exit. In his mirror, he saw the blank-faced man standing motionless in the middle of the parking lot, head turning to track Daniel's movement. The exit road curved back up toward the interstate. But as Daniel climbed the ramp, he realized something was wrong. The ramp was longer than it should be, curving more than he remembered. It seemed to spiral upward, and Daniel couldn't see the interstate ahead, only darkness. The trees on either side of the ramp were pressing in, branches reaching over the road, creating a tunnel. Then the ramp ended, not at the interstate, but at another parking lot. The same parking lot. Daniel was back at the rest stop at mile 247, his truck rolling into the same space he just fled from. The blank-faced man was standing in the same spot, as if Daniel had never left. Daniel screamed. He threw the truck in reverse, backing up frantically. But the exit ramp was gone. Where the exit should be, there was only a barrier and the woods beyond. The rest stop had reconfigured itself. Daniel was trapped. The blank-faced man walked toward the truck again. This time he wasn't alone. Other figures emerged from the woods, dozens of them, all wearing the same maintenance uniforms, all with the same featureless faces. They surrounded the truck in a silent circle, standing perfectly still, faceless heads aimed at Daniel. One of them knocked on the passenger door. 3 measured knocks. Another knocked on the back of the sleeper compartment. 3 knocks. They were all around the truck now, an army of faceless men, all knocking in unison. 3 knocks, pause, 3 knocks, pause. The voice spoke again, but this time it came from everywhere at once, from all the blank-faced men simultaneously. You stopped here. You must complete the inspection. Please exit your vehicle and proceed to the main building. The words echoed, layered, coming at Daniel from every direction. Daniel made a desperate decision. If he couldn't drive out, he'd crash out. He gunned the engine and aimed the Volvo at the concrete barriers separating the parking lot from the woods. The truck hit the barriers at 30 miles per hour, concrete shattering, the Volvo's reinforced bumper taking the impact. The truck plowed through and into the woods. The trees didn't break. The Volvo crashed into them, but the trees were like steel posts, unmovable and unyielding. The truck stopped abruptly, Daniel's seatbelt catching him hard across the chest. The engine died again, and the faceless men were there, stepping between the trees surrounding the truck. Dozens of them, then hundreds, more emerging from the darkness until Daniel couldn't see anything else. They pressed against the truck, hands on the windows, on the doors, on the hood. The glass began to crack under the pressure. Daniel curled into a ball in his seat, hands over his head, waiting for the glass to shatter and those hands to pull him out. The voice spoke again. Please exit your vehicle. Final warning, exit for inspection. Daniel heard himself screaming, What do you want? What inspection? I don't understand. The pressure on the truck eased slightly. The voice said, You stopped. All who stop must be processed. The rest stop requires it. You cannot leave until the inspection is complete. Daniel found a fragment of reason in his terror. What do I have to do? Tell me what to do. The faceless men stepped back from the truck. The one nearest the driver's door said, Proceed to the main building. Alone. Leave all possessions in your vehicle. Enter the building. Complete the inspection. If you pass, you may leave. If you fail, you stay. Daniel's voice shook. What happens if I stay? The faceless man tilted his head. You become staff. You help with future inspections, forever. Daniel looked at the main building in the distance. It was dark, ominous, radiating wrongness, but he was out of options. The truck was dead again, surrounded by unmovable trees, encircled by faceless men. He couldn't fight. He couldn't flee. His only hope was to comply and pray he passed whatever nightmare inspection they demanded. He opened the door and climbed down. The faceless men parted, creating a path toward the building. Daniel walked, his legs barely holding him. The distance seemed to stretch, the building receding as he approached, as if space itself was distorted. But eventually he reached the door. It was metal, institutional, with a small window of wire-reinforced glass. Through the window, Daniel saw only darkness. He pulled the door open and stepped inside. The door closed behind him with a heavy clang. Daniel stood in complete darkness, unable to see anything. He felt walls close on both sides, realized he was in a narrow corridor. He moved forward, hands extended, feeling his way. The corridor seemed to go on forever, turning left, then right, then left again. Daniel lost all sense of direction. Then he saw light ahead, a sickly green glow. He moved toward it and emerged into a large room. The walls were covered in mirrors, dozens of mirrors of different sizes, all reflecting the green light from an unknown source. Daniel looked at the mirrors and saw himself reflected hundreds of times, thousands of times, his terrified face staring back from every angle. But something was wrong with the reflections. They weren't quite synchronized. Some of them moved a fraction of a second before he did. Some moved after. Some didn't move at all, just stared at him with expressions he wasn't making. In one mirror, his reflection was screaming. In another, it was laughing. In a third, it was crying. None of them matched what Daniel was actually doing. A voice, not the faceless men, but something else, spoke from everywhere and nowhere. The inspection is simple. Find your true reflection, the one that matches you exactly. Touch that mirror. You have until the light goes out. The green glow began to dim, slowly but steadily. Daniel stumbled from mirror to mirror, searching desperately. Every reflection was wrong. One had too many teeth. One's eyes were bleeding. One was aging rapidly, decades passing in seconds. The light continued dimming. Daniel ran now, checking every mirror, finding wrongness in each one. His reflections were becoming more distorted, growing taller, shrinking, twisting into shapes that barely resembled human. The light was almost gone. Final moments before darkness, Daniel saw it, a small mirror in the corner, barely noticeable. The reflection in it was perfect. It matched his every movement precisely, showed the terror on his face without exaggeration or distortion. It was him, exactly him. Daniel lunged for it and slapped his hand against the glass. The mirror shattered. Light flooded the room, painful and bright. Daniel closed his eyes against the glare. When he opened them, he was standing in the parking lot of the rest stop next to his truck. The door was open, keys in the ignition. The engine was running. The faceless men were gone. The woods looked normal. Everything was normal. Daniel didn't hesitate. He climbed into his truck, slammed the door, and drove toward the exit. This time, the ramp led up and out, emerging onto Interstate 85 exactly where it should. Traffic flowed normally around him. His GPS worked. His phone had signal. The clock showed 2:15 a.m., 45 minutes since he'd first pulled into the rest stop. Daniel drove straight to Richmond without stopping, completing his delivery in a daze. He told no one about the rest stop at mile 247. Who would believe him? But he filed a detailed report with his company, describing the location and urging them to warn drivers to avoid it. The company investigated. According to their records, according to the Virginia Department of Transportation, according to every official map, there was no rest area at mile marker 247 on Interstate 85. The nearest rest stop was 15 miles north. Daniel Kovacs still drives professionally. 14 years has become 16, but he plans his routes obsessively now, checking and double-checking the locations of every stop. He never pulls into any rest area without verifying it on multiple maps first, and he never ever stops at a rest area that appears unlit and empty, because he knows what happens to drivers who stop at the wrong places. Places that shouldn't exist, but do. Places that inspect you to see if you're real enough to leave. Daniel passed his inspection. He found his true reflection and was allowed to return to the world. But sometimes, late at night, he wonders about the other reflections in those mirrors. Were they other versions of himself? Other Daniels who'd stopped at mile 247 on different nights, different timelines. And if he touched the wrong mirror, where would he be now? Would he be one of the faceless men in maintenance uniforms, waiting for the next driver to make the mistake of stopping? He doesn't know. He doesn't want to know. But the question haunts him, reflected back at every mirror he sees, every reflective surface. Which reflection is the real Daniel Kovacs? And how can he be sure he chose correctly that night? Maybe he didn't. Maybe the Daniel who escaped wasn't the real one. Maybe the true Daniel Kovacs is still in that room of mirrors, searching frantically as the light dims, while a copy drives his truck through a world that accepts him as genuine. These thoughts come to Daniel in the deep hours of the night when the highways are empty and the world feels thin. These thoughts and the memory of that voice. Find your true reflection. What if he's still looking? Story 5. The convoy that wasn't there. Sarah Mitchell had been driving tanker trucks for 11 years, specializing in hazardous materials transport across the western United States. Her CDL endorsements included tank vehicles and hazmat, qualifications that took years of training and experience to earn. On February 12, 2022, she picked up a load of industrial chemicals in Salt Lake City, Utah, destined for a facility in Boise, Idaho. The route was straightforward. Interstate 84 northwest through the Utah and Idaho desert, approximately 340 miles. Sarah had hauled this route dozens of times before, always professional, always cautious, always aware that her cargo required the highest level of safety. She departed Salt Lake City at 7 p.m., planning a 6-hour drive with one fuel stop near the Idaho border. February nights in the Utah desert were cold, temperatures well below freezing, with occasional snow flurries. Sarah's Peterbilt 579 was equipped with the latest safety features, and her tanker trailer had passed inspection 3 days earlier. Everything was by the book, exactly as it should be for a hazmat load. The highway was moderately busy in the early evening, passenger vehicles heading home, a few other commercial trucks, normal traffic. Sarah settled into her driving rhythm, maintaining a steady 65 miles per hour, staying in the right lane. Her CB radio carried the usual chatter: traffic warnings, weather reports, truckers complaining about freight rates. The familiar background noise was comforting. Around 9 p.m., about 80 miles into her trip, Sarah noticed a convoy of trucks ahead of her. She could see their taillights stretching into the distance, at least 6 or 7 vehicles traveling together, maintaining tight spacing. Convoys weren't uncommon, especially when trucking companies moved multiple loads to the same destination. Sarah thought nothing of it and maintained her distance, not wanting to crowd them. But as she drove, the convoy maintained its position. Sarah wasn't gaining on them or falling behind, even though her cruise control was set precisely. The distance remained constant, as if both she and the convoy were moving at exactly the same speed. After 20 minutes, Sarah's professional curiosity was piqued. She clicked on her CB. "Northbound convoy on 84, what's your 20? "This is southbound tanker," she caught her mistake. "Northbound tanker looking to pass if you're running slow." No response. The CB crackled with other conversations, but no one from the convoy answered. Sarah tried again. "Convoy on 84, what company are you running for? Y'all got a bear in the convoy." Still no response. It was possible they weren't on CB, but unlikely. Most professional drivers monitored Channel 19, and a convoy of that size almost certainly had someone listening. Sarah decided to pass them. She activated her turn signal and moved into the left lane, gradually accelerating to 70 miles per hour. But as her speed increased, the convoy seemed to speed up as well. She wasn't gaining on them. She pushed to 75, 5 miles over the speed limit, faster than she was comfortable driving with hazmat, but she wanted to get past these trucks and back to her normal pace. Still, the convoy remained the same distance ahead. This was impossible. Sarah could see their taillights clearly, could see that they were regular commercial trucks, 53-foot trailers, standard configurations. But they were moving at speeds that didn't match their appearance, or she was misjudging the distance, or something was wrong with her perception. She slowed back down to 65 and moved back into the right lane. The convoy remained ahead of her, same distance, unchanging. Sarah checked her GPS. She was making normal progress. The mile markers were passing at the expected rate. The convoy wasn't slowing her down or affecting her trip, but their presence nagged at her. Something felt wrong. Around 10:30 p.m., the convoy took an exit. Sarah watched as all 6 or 7 trucks, she still couldn't get an exact count, smoothly transitioned from the highway to an exit ramp. The sign indicated a rest area. Sarah knew this rest area. She'd stopped there several times before. It was small, with limited parking, maybe space for 10 trucks maximum. A convoy that size would fill it completely. 10 minutes later, Sarah's fuel was running low. She hadn't planned to stop until the Idaho border, but she'd been running her heater on high against the cold, using more fuel than expected. The next exit was the same rest area where the convoy had stopped. Sarah debated. She preferred commercial truck stops to rest areas, especially for fuel. But the next truck stop was 40 miles farther, and she wasn't sure she'd make it. She decided to pull into the rest area, hoping there was enough parking left after the convoy. The exit ramp curved down toward the rest area. Sarah could see the parking lot lights in the distance. As she descended the ramp, she braced herself for a crowded lot, planning where she could safely park her tanker among the convoy vehicles. But when she pulled into the rest area, it was completely empty. Not mostly empty, utterly empty. No trucks, no cars, no convoy. The lot was deserted, as if no one had stopped here in hours. Sarah sat stunned, idling in the entrance. She'd watched the convoy take this exact exit 10 minutes ago. She'd seen all of them leave the highway together. There was nowhere else they could have gone. The exit led only to this rest area, a loop that returned to the highway. Sarah grabbed her CB. Anyone listening? Did a convoy just pass through the rest area at mile marker 197 on 84? This is a northbound tanker trying to confirm what I'm seeing. A male voice responded immediately. Northbound tanker, this is westbound on 84. You said mile 197 rest area, Sarah confirmed. The voice continued. There is no rest area at mile 197. Nearest rest area is mile 214, about 17 miles ahead. Sarah felt her skin prickle. She looked at the blue service sign at the entrance to the rest area mile 197. She was parked at mile 197. The sign proved it. The rest area was real. She keyed her mic. Negative driver, I'm literally sitting at the rest area right now. It's at mile 197. A different voice came on, female, puzzled. Northbound tanker, I passed mile 197 about 10 minutes ago. There was no exit, no rest area, just highway. Sarah turned on her phone, opening a maps application. She zoomed in on her current location. The map showed Interstate 84, showed her location, but showed no rest area. According to the digital map, she was parked on the shoulder of the highway, even though she was clearly in a paved parking lot with designated spaces and a restroom building. She got out of her truck, needing to confirm that this place was real. The February cold hit her immediately, wind cutting through her jacket. The rest area was real. She could see it, touch it, stand on its pavement. Restroom building was solid, constructed of concrete block with a metal roof. Everything was physical and tangible. But according to her CB and her phone, it didn't exist. Sarah walked across the parking lot toward the restroom building. The lights overhead hummed and flickered slightly. She needed to use the facilities, and despite the wrongness of this place, biological needs were insistent. She pushed open the door to the women's restroom and stopped. The interior was wrong. The layout was backward, as if she was looking at a mirror image of a normal restroom. The sinks were on the right instead of the left. The stalls were arranged in reverse order. Even the signage on the walls was backward, letters reversed. Sarah stepped inside carefully, her boots echoing on tile floor. She looked at herself in the mirror above the sinks and saw the problem immediately. Her reflection was normal. In a reversed restroom in a mirror, her reflection should be backward, but it was. She was looking at herself straight on, as if the mirror was a window and she was looking at a copy of herself on the other side. The reflection blinked when she blinked. It moved when she moved. But something about it was fundamentally wrong, off by some margin she couldn't identify. Sarah heard a sound behind her and spun around. A woman was standing in the doorway, or where the doorway had been. The entrance Sarah had come through wasn't there anymore. Instead, there was just wall. And standing against that wall was a woman in a truck driver's jacket wearing Sarah's face. The doppelganger smiled. You noticed. Her voice was Sarah's voice exactly. Most don't. They use the restroom and leave, never realizing they've been swapped. But you noticed. Sarah's mind reeled. Swapped. What are you talking about? The copy tilted her head. The rest area at mile 197 is a transfer point. We need bodies occasionally. Drivers who won't be missed for a few hours. We borrow yours, you stay here, and when we're done, we swap back. Usually. Sometimes we like the body too much to return it. Sarah backed away, but there was nowhere to go. The restroom had no windows and the door had vanished. The copy stepped closer. Don't worry. I'll take good care of your truck. Hazmat endorsement, tanker experience. I can drive your body better than you do. You just rest here. Someone will be along eventually to swap with you and you'll get a body back. Might not be yours, but you'll get one. That's fair, isn't it? Sarah lunged at the copy, trying to tackle her to fight her way out. But the copy wasn't physical. Sarah's hands passed through her like smoke. The copy laughed. I'm already in your truck, Sarah. This is just a courtesy, me explaining so you understand. Look. The copy gestured and became transparent. Sarah could see the parking lot. She could see her Peterbilt 579 with the tanker trailer, and she could see herself, her body, climbing into the cab. The copy wearing her skin looked satisfied, content, running through the pre-drive checks with professional competence. The truck's engine started. Sarah screamed and pounded on the transparent wall, but no sound escaped the restroom. She watched helplessly as her body drove her truck back onto Interstate 84 and disappeared into the night, hauling hazmat chemicals toward Boise. She was trapped in a restroom in a rest area that didn't exist, watching her life drive away without her. Sarah sank to the floor, shaking. This couldn't be real. It was a hallucination, a nightmare, a psychotic break. She was still in her truck on the highway, experiencing some kind of episode. This wasn't happening. Hours passed. Sarah sat on the cold tile floor, trying to will herself awake, trying to make this nightmare end. But it didn't end. The restroom remained real, solid, unchanging. Eventually, Sarah heard a sound, an engine. She stood and looked through the transparent wall. A car was pulling into the rest area parking lot. A middle-aged man got out and walked toward the restroom building. The wall behind Sarah solidified, and the door reappeared. The man pushed open the women's restroom door and stepped inside. He looked at Sarah without surprise. "Oh good, there's already someone here, makes this easier." Before Sarah could react, the man's form blurred and shifted. He became a woman or something wearing a woman's shape, and that woman was walking towards Sarah with purpose. "Your turn," the entity said. "You've waited long enough. I need to borrow you for a while." Sarah tried to run, but the restroom was too small. The entity grabbed her, and Sarah felt a sensation like being turned inside out. Then she was falling through darkness, and she was in the parking lot standing next to a Honda Civic. She was wearing men's clothes that weren't hers. Her hands weren't her hands. They were larger, rougher, unmistakably male. Sarah looked down at herself and realized she was in the body of the middle-aged man who'd entered the restroom. She tried to scream, but the voice that came out wasn't hers. Sarah stumbled to the Civic and looked at the reflection in the car window. A man's face stared back, frightened and confused. This was impossible. She heard a truck engine and turned. Her Peterbilt was pulling into the rest area, backing into a parking space with professional precision. Sarah ran toward it, waving her arms, these arms that weren't hers, trying to signal. The driver's door opened, and Sarah Mitchell climbed down from the cab. The real Sarah in her original body, looking tired but unharmed. The Sarah from the truck looked at the man, at Sarah trapped in the man's body, with mild confusion. "You need help, buddy." Her voice, Sarah's voice, sounded normal, concerned, real. The entity hadn't kept her body. It had returned it exactly as promised, but Sarah was no longer in it. Sarah tried to explain, but how could she? "I'm not, this isn't." The words wouldn't come, wouldn't make sense. The Sarah from the truck shook her head sympathetically. "You okay? You look confused. Want me to call someone?" Sarah wanted to scream that she was Sarah Mitchell, that this was her truck, her body, her life. But the Sarah standing in front of her was more convincing than she could ever be, trapped in a stranger's body. The truck Sarah shrugged and walked toward the restroom. Sarah watched, helpless, as her own body entered the building. She waited, but the Sarah who emerged 5 minutes later was the same, her original self, unchanged. The entity hadn't swapped back. It had kept the body it was wearing, the man's body with Sarah trapped inside it. Truck Sarah climbed back into the Peterbilt, checked her mirrors, and pulled out of the rest area. Sarah watched her life drive away on Interstate 84, heading toward Boise, while she stood in the cold February night in a body that wasn't hers, with a life that wasn't hers, and no way to prove who she really was. Sarah, or the man she now appeared to be, checked the wallet in her pocket. Driver's license for Thomas Warren, age 47, address in Ogden, Utah. Keys to the Honda Civic. A life she didn't know, in a body she didn't want, because she'd stopped at a rest area that didn't officially exist. She got in the Civic and drove back to the highway, because what else could she do? The rest area disappeared in her rearview mirror, winking out of existence like it had never been there. Sarah traveled to Ogden and tried to assume Thomas Warren's life, but she didn't know his passwords, his family, his job. Within a week, everyone thought Thomas had experienced some kind of mental breakdown. Within a month, he was in psychiatric care, insisting he was actually a female truck driver named Sarah Mitchell. The real Sarah Mitchell, or the entity wearing her body, completed the delivery to Boise without incident. Sarah's company received no complaints. Her family noticed nothing strange. The entity had studied her perfectly, absorbed her memories, her mannerisms, her life. It was more Sarah than Sarah had been. Sometimes, the thing wearing Sarah's body drives past mile marker 197 on Interstate 84. It smiles, remembering the rest that doesn't exist, remembering the swap, and it wonders if Thomas Warren, the body it discarded with Sarah Mitchell's mind trapped inside, ever found peace. It doubts so. The transfers rarely did. But that wasn't its problem anymore. The entity has a life now. Sarah Mitchell's life, a good life, and it plans to keep it. All it cost was stopping at the rest area at mile 197 and agreeing to a swap. Such a small thing, such a terrible price. Sarah Mitchell still exists somewhere, but she's not Sarah Mitchell anymore. She's Thomas Warren, or she's in psychiatric care, or she's given up trying to convince anyone of the truth. The entity doesn't care which. It has what it wanted: a life, a body, a reality. And it got these things because a truck driver made the mistake of following a convoy that wasn't there to a rest area that doesn't exist for a swap that can never be undone. The convoy still drives Interstate 84. Other truckers see it sometimes, driving in tight formation, never responding to CB calls. They watch it take an exit, and sometimes they follow, curious or needing to stop. Most of them don't notice the swap. Most of them continue on, unaware that they're now piloting borrowed bodies, that entities are living their lives. Most never realize what was taken from them at mile marker 197. But Sarah Mitchell realized, and that knowledge is its own prison, more inescapable than any physical cage. She knows who she really is. She just can't prove it, and no one will ever believe her. That's the real horror of the rest area that doesn't exist. Not the swap itself, but the after, the knowing. The helpless certainty that you've been replaced, while the world accepts the replacement and rejects the real you. Sarah Mitchell learned this on February 12, 2022, when she followed a convoy to a rest area at mile marker 197. She's still learning it every day in a body and life that will never be hers. Still learning and still hoping, against all reason, that maybe someday there will be another swap, another chance, another rest area where the entities make trades. But deep down, Sarah knows the truth. The entities don't trade back. They only trade forward, and once you're swapped, you stay swapped. Forever. Story 6. The Mile That Repeated. Christopher Hayes had been a long-haul trucker for 16 years, running routes primarily through the American Southwest. On September 23, 2019, he was hauling construction materials from Phoenix, Arizona, to Albuquerque, New Mexico, a journey of approximately 400 miles along Interstate 10 and Interstate 25. Christopher was known among his colleagues as Steady Chris, a driver who maintained perfect schedules, never had accidents, and approached trucking with mechanical precision. He kept detailed logs, maintained his truck meticulously, and planned every route down to the minute. He departed Phoenix at 3 p.m., planning to drive through the night and arrive in Albuquerque by 8 a.m. the following morning. The September heat was still intense, temperatures in the mid-90s, but Christopher's Freightliner Cascadia had excellent air conditioning and handled the desert climate well. The first few hours were uneventful. He made his scheduled fuel stop in Tucson, grabbed dinner at a truck stop in Wilcox, and continued east as the sun set over the Arizona desert. Around 10 p.m., Christopher crossed into New Mexico on Interstate 10. The highway stretched ahead into darkness. the landscape flat and desolate, with only occasional distant lights indicating ranch houses or small towns. Traffic was light. Christopher had seen maybe 5 other vehicles in the past hour. He was making excellent time, right on schedule, exactly as he preferred. At 10:47 p.m., Christopher passed mile marker 23. He noted it because he always noted mile markers. They were checkpoints in his mental schedule, ways to verify he was maintaining the correct pace. Mile marker 23 meant he was about 15 miles from Lordsburg, where he planned a brief rest stop to check his load straps and grab coffee. Everything was proceeding perfectly. 7 minutes later, at 10:54 p.m., Christopher passed mile marker 23 again. He blinked, certain he'd misread the sign. But no, it clearly said 23, illuminated briefly in his headlights as he passed. That was impossible. He'd been driving east at a constant 68 miles per hour for 7 minutes. He should be at mile marker 30 or 31 by now, not back at mile marker 23. Christopher checked his odometer. It showed he'd traveled 8 miles since the first time he'd passed marker 23. The odometer was working correctly, but the mile marker said 23. Christopher grabbed his GPS unit. It showed him on Interstate 10 eastbound between Lordsburg and Deming, New Mexico. The map looked correct. His position was updating normally, the blue dot moving along the highway representation. But when he looked at the actual mile marker numbers on the GPS, they didn't match the physical signs. The GPS showed him at mile marker 31. The sign he just passed said 23. Christopher's methodical mind tried to find a rational explanation. Perhaps the New Mexico Department of Transportation had replaced the mile markers incorrectly. Perhaps there was a duplicate marker 23 due to a construction error. Perhaps he was misreading the signs in the darkness. But even as he considered these possibilities, he knew they were wrong. Something was happening that didn't fit into his careful, logical world. At 11:01 p.m., Christopher passed mile marker 23 for the 3rd time. His hands tightened on the steering wheel. This wasn't a misreading or a mistake. He was trapped in some kind of loop, driving the same mile of Interstate 10 repeatedly. But how was that possible? The road ahead looked normal. He wasn't turning around. He wasn't exiting. He was driving straight east, exactly as he had been for hours. The highway didn't loop back on itself. This stretch of I-10 was straight as an arrow across the New Mexico desert. Christopher tried to observe more carefully, to find some detail that would explain this. He noted a specific rock formation on the right side of the highway, a cluster of boulders that looked vaguely like a crouching animal. He watched his odometer. 7 minutes and 8 miles later, he passed the same rock formation again, just before mile marker 23 appeared once more in his headlights. He was definitely looping. Somehow, impossibly, he was driving the same 8-mile stretch of highway over and over. Christopher grabbed his CB radio. "Breaker, breaker, any eastbound traffic on I-10 near Lordsburg, does anyone copy?" Static answered him. He tried again. "This is eastbound on I-10, mile marker 23, looking for a radio check." Nothing but dead air. Christopher decided to test something. He slowed his truck down to 50 miles per hour, well below the speed limit. If he was looping, slowing down should change when he reached mile marker 23 again. He drove slowly, carefully, counting seconds. At the expected time, slightly delayed due to his reduced speed, mile marker 23 appeared again. The loop didn't care about his speed. It just repeated. At 11:32 p.m., Christopher passed mile marker 23 for the 7th time. He pulled over to the shoulder and stopped completely. His hazard lights blinked rhythmically in the darkness. Christopher sat in the cab thinking. This was unprecedented in his 16 years of driving. It violated every law of physics and geography he understood. But it was happening. The evidence was undeniable. He got out of the truck, grabbing a flashlight. The night air was cool now, the desert temperature dropping quickly after sunset. Christopher walked to the mile marker post and examined it. It was standard, a green rectangular sign with reflective white lettering reading 23. It was bolted to a metal post sunk into the ground. Everything about it was normal, official, exactly what a mile marker should be. Christopher made a decision. He would mark this location somehow, create a landmark he could watch for. He used his pocket knife to scratch a distinctive X pattern into the post below the mile marker sign. Then he returned to his truck and continued driving east. 8 miles later at 11:47 p.m., Christopher's headlights illuminated mile marker 23 again. He slowed and stopped next to it, got out with his flashlight, and examined the post. The X pattern he'd carved was there, clearly visible. This wasn't a different mile marker 23. It was the exact same physical marker, the exact same post, with his exact scratch marks. He was passing the same object in the same location repeatedly. Christopher felt the first stirrings of real fear. This wasn't just disorientation or confusion. This was impossible made manifest. He was trapped in a geographic loop that shouldn't exist, couldn't exist. He got back in his truck and tried to think logically. What were his options? He could continue driving east, hoping the loop would eventually break. He could turn around and drive west back toward Arizona. He could stop completely and wait for help. None of these options felt right, but he had to choose something. He decided to try increasing speed. If 68 miles per hour resulted in 7-minute loops, perhaps going faster would somehow break the pattern. Christopher accelerated to 80 miles per hour, pushing his loaded truck faster than was safe or legal. The desert flew past. 6 minutes later, mile marker 23 appeared again. Faster speed only made the loops shorter. Christopher tried driving slower, reducing his speed to 30 miles per hour. 14 minutes later, mile marker 23. The loop adjusted to whatever speed he chose, always ending at the same place. He tried swerving across lanes, thinking perhaps he needed to be in a specific position on the road. No change. He tried driving with his headlights off, thinking perhaps this was some kind of optical illusion. Mile marker 23 still appeared, and he nearly crashed while driving blind. At 1:15 a.m., Christopher had passed mile marker 23 times. The symmetry him. He'd been trapped in this loop for more than 2 hours, driving the same 8 miles of Interstate 10 over and over. His fuel gauge hadn't moved. The truck was consuming fuel normally, but the gauge stayed at 3/4 full, frozen at whatever level it had been when the loop started. Christopher's phone had no signal. The clock on his phone and the clock on his dashboard were drifting apart. The dashboard clock showed 1:15 a.m., but his phone showed 12:47 a.m. Time itself was becoming unreliable. Christopher felt his careful, logical mind beginning to fracture. This situation had no rational explanation, no solution he could calculate or plan. He was helpless in a way he'd never experienced before. He tried the CB again. This time he heard something. Not words, but a sound, a low, rhythmic pulsing like a heartbeat or machinery. Christopher turned up the volume. The pulsing grew louder, and beneath it he could hear what might have been voices, layered and distorted beyond comprehension. He quickly turned the radio off. Whatever that sound was, it wasn't help. At 2:08 a.m., Christopher saw headlights behind him. Another vehicle was on the highway approaching fast. Relief flooded through him. Another person, another witness, someone who could confirm this wasn't just his imagination. Christopher slowed down, letting the vehicle catch up. As it drew closer, Christopher could see it was a pickup truck, dark-colored, moving at high speed. The pickup pulled alongside Christopher's truck. Christopher looked over, trying to see the driver. The pickup's windows were tinted, too dark to see through. Christopher honked his horn, trying to get the driver's attention to signal for help. The pickup maintained its position next to him for a few seconds, then accelerated away, disappearing into the darkness ahead. 4 minutes later, Christopher passed mile marker 23 again, and immediately after passing it, he saw taillights ahead. The dark pickup was stopped on the shoulder, hazard lights flashing. Christopher's relief returned. He pulled over behind the pickup and got out, grabbing his flashlight. As he approached the pickup, Christopher called out, "Hey, you okay? I need help. I'm having some kind of emergency." He reached the driver's side window and shined his flashlight inside. The pickup was empty. No driver, no passengers, no one. But the engine was running, the hazard lights were blinking, and the driver's door was locked from the inside. Christopher backed away slowly. He looked at the pickup's license plate, memorizing the number automatically. Then he returned to his truck and driving. At mile marker 23, the next loop, he looked for the pickup truck. It was gone. The shoulder was empty, no vehicle, no lights, as if the pickup had never existed. But 5 minutes later, Christopher saw headlights behind him again. The pickup was back, approaching fast like it had before. It pulled alongside him again, stayed for a few seconds, then sped ahead. Christopher knew what would happen next. At mile marker 23, the pickup would be stopped on the shoulder again, empty and locked. It happened exactly as he predicted. The pickup was there in the exact same position, engine running, abandoned. Christopher didn't stop this time. He drove past it, watching it disappear in his mirrors. The pickup was part of the loop now, along with him. Or perhaps it had always been part of the loop, and Christopher was just now understanding the pattern. At 3:42 a.m., Christopher had been trapped for nearly 5 hours. He'd passed mile marker 2337 times. The dashboard clock and his phone clock were now showing completely different times, neither of which seemed correct. Christopher's mind was fracturing further. He'd started talking to himself, narrating his observations, trying to maintain some sense of control through documentation. This is loop 38. Time is 3:42. Fuel gauge still shows 3/4. The pickup will appear in 3 minutes. And it did. Every loop, the same pattern. The pickup would approach, pull alongside, speed ahead, then be found stopped at mile marker 23. Christopher began experimenting with the pattern. He tried honking when the pickup pulled alongside. No change. He tried flashing his lights. No change. He tried stopping before mile marker 23, letting the pickup pass him completely. The result was the same. At mile marker 23, the pickup would be stopped on the shoulder, and the loop would reset. Christopher began to wonder if he was the pickup, if perhaps he'd died or gone insane, and what he was experiencing was some kind of purgatory or psychotic break. Maybe he was the empty truck on the shoulder, looping forever, while his consciousness rode along experiencing it from different angles. The thought terrified him more than any rational explanation could. At 4:16 a.m., something changed. As Christopher passed mile marker 23 for the 42nd time, he saw a figure standing beside it. A man in a highway maintenance uniform, holding a stop sign. Christopher's first instinct was relief. A person, someone who worked for the Department of Transportation, someone who could help. He slowed to the man. The maintenance worker approached the driver's side window. Christopher rolled it down, words tumbling out. "Thank God, I've been trapped here for hours, driving the same mile over and over. My phone doesn't work. I need help." The maintenance worker held up a hand, stopping him. "I know," the man said. His voice was calm, matter of fact. "Mile marker 23 is broken. We're working on it." Christopher stared at him. "Broken? What does that mean, broken?" The maintenance worker smiled slightly. "Sometimes a mile breaks. The distance becomes unstable, collapses in on itself, creates a loop. Happens more often than you'd think, but usually we catch it before anyone gets stuck. You're unlucky." "How do I get out?" Christopher asked desperately. The maintenance worker considered the question. "You have to find the seam. Every loop has a seam, a place where it reconnects to itself. Find that spot and you can slip out, but you have to be going the right speed and you have to be looking for it. Most people never notice it." "Where is it? What does it look like?" Christopher's hands were shaking. The maintenance worker shrugged. "Different for every loop. For this one," he paused, thinking. "Watch the road surface. There's a place where the asphalt color changes just slightly." from dark gray to slightly lighter gray. It's about 6 miles past this marker. When you see that change, accelerate to exactly 73 miles per hour. Hold that speed for exactly 10 seconds. That should pop you out. Christopher grabbed a pen and paper, writing down the instructions. 73 miles per hour, hold for 10 seconds, watch for the asphalt color change. He looked up to thank the maintenance worker, but the man was gone. Christopher looked around. The shoulder was empty. No one was there. Had the man ever been there? Or was Christopher's fractured mind creating helpful hallucinations? It didn't matter. Christopher had instructions, real or imagined. He had something to try. He put the truck in gear and continued east, watching the road surface carefully. The asphalt was dark gray, uniform, showing no variations. Christopher drove slowly, studying every inch of pavement in his headlights. There. 6 miles past mile marker 23, exactly as the maintenance worker had said, Christopher saw it. A subtle change in the asphalt color, a line across the road where darker pavement met slightly lighter pavement. It was barely visible, the kind of thing you'd never notice unless you were specifically looking for it. Christopher lined up his truck, checked his speedometer, and accelerated. 65 miles per hour, 70 miles per hour, 73 miles per hour, exactly as he crossed the seam. Christopher counted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Mile marker 24 appeared in his headlights. Christopher let out a sob of relief. 24, not 23. The next number. He'd escaped the loop. He was moving forward again, progressing along Interstate 10, breaking free of the geographic prison that had held him for 5 hours. Christopher accelerated, putting distance between himself and mile marker 23, terrified that he might somehow fall back into the loop. Mile marker 25, mile marker 26, mile marker 27. Each one was a gift, a proof that he'd escaped. The dashboard clock and his phone clock suddenly synchronized, both showing 4:34 a.m. His fuel gauge dropped abruptly to half full, catching up to the fuel he'd actually consumed during the loops. Everything was returning to normal. Christopher drove straight through to Albuquerque, too frightened to stop. He arrived at 7:15 a.m. behind schedule for the first time in his career. He unloaded his construction materials in a daze, barely speaking to the warehouse crew. When he finally checked into a hotel and collapsed on the bed, he slept for 14 hours straight. When he woke, Christopher wrote down everything that had happened, trying to document it while the memories were still clear. He checked maps of Interstate 10, looking for anything unusual about mile marker 23 in New Mexico. There was nothing, just an ordinary stretch of highway across desert land. He searched online for reports of other drivers experiencing loops or geographic anomalies. He found stories, dozens of them, from drivers who'd experienced similar phenomena. Loops that repeated, miles that didn't end, highways that went nowhere. Christopher Hayes still drives long haul, 16 years becoming 20. But he plans his routes carefully now, researching not just the roads but the stories about them. He avoids certain highways at certain times. And he never, ever drives past mile marker 23 on Interstate 10 in New Mexico. He takes an alternate route, adding an hour to his schedule, because no amount of efficiency is worth risking another loop. Sometimes late at night, Christopher wonders about the maintenance worker who gave him the instructions to escape. Was he real? Was he a hallucination? Or was he something else? A guardian of the broken places in America's highway system, helping trapped travelers find their way out. Christopher doesn't know. He's grateful regardless, because some miles are broken, some distances collapse, some loop forever. Christopher learned this on September 23, 2019, when he drove the same 8 miles 42 times, trapped at mile marker 23. He learned and he escaped. But sometimes Christopher wonders about the dark pickup truck that shared his loop. Is it still there, still driving the same mile, still stopping at the same spot? Is the driver, if there ever was a driver, still trapped, still looping, still waiting for someone to show them the scene. Christopher hopes not. But he suspects the truth. The broken miles don't fix themselves, they stay broken. And some travelers never find the scene, never learn the correct speed, never escape. They just loop, forever, passing the same mile marker again and again until they forget there was ever anything else. Until the loop becomes their entire reality and they can't imagine any other existence. Christopher escaped, but he knows with absolute certainty that others haven't, that others won't. That mile marker 23 is still out there, still broken, still waiting for its next victim. The next driver who doesn't know to watch for the seam, who doesn't know the exact speed required, who doesn't know that some miles don't just measure distance. Some miles measure eternity. Story 7. The passenger who leaves. Maria Santos had been driving cross-country routes for 13 years, specializing in expedited deliveries that required long hours and fast turnarounds. On June 18, 2021, she picked up a load of medical equipment in Atlanta, Georgia, bound for a hospital in Seattle, Washington. The route was approximately 2,700 miles, and Maria had 4 days to complete it, tight but manageable for an experienced driver like her. She'd driven coast to coast dozens of times, knew the best truck stops, the worst traffic bottlenecks, and every shortcut worth taking. Maria left Atlanta at 4 a.m., planning to maximize her driving hours during the first day. Her Kenworth W900 was her pride. She'd customized it over years, adding comfort features to the sleeper berth, upgrading the sound system, even installing ambient lighting that made the cab feel like home. Maria spent more time in her truck than in her actual apartment, and she designed the space to reflect that reality. The first day went perfectly. Maria made excellent progress, pushing through Alabama and Mississippi, crossing into Louisiana by midday. She followed Interstate 20 West, eating up miles, staying alert despite the monotony of highway driving. By 8 p.m., she'd reached Shreveport, Louisiana, decided to take a 30-minute rest at a truck stop she'd used many times before. Maria pulled into the parking area, found a space, and shut down the engine. The truck stop was moderately busy, maybe 20 other trucks parked, drivers sleeping or getting food. Maria climbed down from the cab, stretched her legs, and walked to the convenience store inside the facility. She grabbed a sandwich, a large coffee, and a bag of trail mix. While waiting in line to pay, she noticed a young woman standing near the entrance, looking uncertain. The woman was maybe 25 years old, wearing a light jacket and jeans, carrying a small backpack. She looked lost or confused, checking her phone repeatedly. Maria felt a pang of sympathy. She'd grown up in a family that emphasized helping others, and this woman clearly needed assistance. After paying for her items, Maria approached the woman. "You okay? You look like you might be lost." The woman looked up, relief washing over her face. "Oh, thank God, yes, I'm completely lost. My car broke down about 10 miles back and I got a ride here with someone, but now I can't get a signal on my phone to call for a tow truck. I'm trying to get to Dallas. My sister lives there. I know this is asking a lot, but is there any way you could give me a ride? Just to Dallas. I can pay for gas." Maria hesitated. She had a firm rule about not picking up hitchhikers or random passengers. It was a safety issue, and company policy strictly forbade it. But Dallas was directly on her route. She'd be passing through it in about 4 hours. And this woman seemed genuinely distressed, not dangerous or suspicious. Maria made a decision that she'd regret for the rest of her life. "Okay, I can take you to Dallas, but I need to see your ID first just so I know who I'm giving a ride to. And you need to understand that I'm on a tight schedule. We go straight there, no stops except for fuel." The woman nodded eagerly and produced a driver's license from her pocket. The name read Jennifer Watts, 26 years old, with a Dallas address. Everything looked legitimate. Maria took a photo of the ID with her phone, another safety precaution, and led Jennifer to her truck. They climbed into the cab, Jennifer taking the passenger seat. Maria started the engine and pulled back onto Interstate 20 westbound. At first, the conversation was pleasant. Jennifer thanked Maria repeatedly, explained that she'd been visiting a friend in Shreveport when her car's transmission had died. She talked about her sister in Dallas, about her job as a dental hygienist, about normal everyday things. Maria relaxed slightly. This would be just a few hours and she dropped Jennifer off in Dallas, having done a good deed. Around 10 p.m., about an hour into the drive, Jennifer said something odd. "Do you ever feel like you're not real? Like you're just a character someone made up and none of this actually matters?" Maria glanced over, surprised. Jennifer was staring straight ahead through the windshield, her expression distant. "That's a heavy question," Maria replied carefully. "You doing okay?" Jennifer didn't respond immediately. Then she said, "I'm tired of pretending, tired of playing the role, tired of being Jennifer Watts." Maria felt unease creep up her spine. "What do you mean, playing a role?" Jennifer turned to look at her and Maria saw that the woman's expression had changed completely. The uncertainty and relief were gone, replaced with something cold and calculating. "I mean exactly that. Jennifer Watts doesn't exist. Neither do you, really. We're both just temporarily wearing these skins, driving this truck through a story that doesn't matter." Maria's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Listen, if you're having some kind of crisis, I can drop you off at the next town. But you need to stop talking like that." Jennifer smiled, and the smile was wrong, too wide, too fixed. "You can't drop me off, Maria. I'm not really here. I mean, I am here, but not in the way you think. I'm a passenger, but not the kind that gets out." Maria's training kicked in. She needed to get this woman out of her truck as quickly and safely as possible. "There's a rest area in about 20 miles. We'll stop there and you can get out." Jennifer laughed, a sound without humor. "We can stop. I'll get out, but I'll still be here. You're not understanding yet. Let me show you." Without warning, Jennifer opened the passenger door. At 70 miles per hour, wind roared into the cab. Maria screamed, "Close the door. What are you doing?" Jennifer unbuckled her seatbelt and leaned toward the open door as if preparing to jump. Maria grabbed for her, trying to pull her back, one hand leaving the steering wheel. The truck swerved dangerously. Then Jennifer pulled the door closed and rebuckled her seatbelt as if nothing had happened. "See, I can't leave. Physics won't let me. The story won't let me. I'm here for the duration, Maria. You picked me up and now you're stuck with me." Maria was shaking, adrenaline flooding her system. "You're insane. I'm calling the police." She grabbed her phone, but Jennifer reached over and took it from her hand with surprising strength. "No police," Jennifer said calmly. "They can't help. They can't even see me." "Only you can see me, Maria. That's how this works. You invited me in and now I'm part of your reality, your personal passenger, your companion for as long as I choose to stay." Maria tried to grab her phone back, but Jennifer threw the open window. Maria heard it clatter on the pavement behind them, gone forever. Fear turned to anger. Maria pulled the truck over to the shoulder, activated her hazard lights, and turned to Jennifer. "Get out. Get out right now, or I'm physically throwing you out." Jennifer's smile widened. "Try it." Maria reached for her, intending to grab the woman's arm and drag her from the truck. But when Maria's hand touched Jennifer's jacket, she felt nothing. Her hand passed through Jennifer's arm as if the woman was made of mist. Maria yanked her hand back, staring. Jennifer sat solid in the seat, clearly visible, three-dimensional and real, but Maria couldn't touch her. "What are you?" Maria whispered. Jennifer tilted her head. "I'm what happens when drivers get too lonely. When they spend too much time alone on dark highways, talking to themselves, living in their own heads. Eventually, the loneliness creates something. A passenger, a presence, me." Maria restarted the truck and pulled back onto the highway, her mind racing. This wasn't real. She was hallucinating, experiencing some kind of psychotic episode brought on by exhaustion or stress. Jennifer wasn't actually there. Maria was alone in the truck, talking to a delusion. That had to be the explanation. "You're not real," Maria said firmly. "I'm imagining you." Jennifer shrugged. "Believe whatever helps you cope, but I'm here and I'm staying. And you're going to do exactly what I tell you or things will get very bad for you. Maria laughed bitterly. You can't even touch physical objects. You're a hallucination. You can't hurt me. Jennifer's expression darkened. Let's test that theory. The truck's steering wheel jerked hard to the left, as if invisible hands had grabbed it and yanked. Maria fought for control, overcorrecting, the trailer swaying dangerously behind her. She managed to straighten out, breathing heavily. Jennifer hadn't moved from her seat, hadn't reached for the wheel, but the truck had responded as if someone had physically forced it. I can't touch you, Jennifer said quietly, but I can touch everything else. Your truck, your controls, your cargo. I can make your life very difficult, Maria, or you can cooperate and we'll get along fine. Maria felt tears forming. This couldn't be happening. What do you want? Why are you doing this? Jennifer leaned back in the seat, getting comfortable. I want you to drive, that's all. Keep driving, keep me company, and everything will be fine. Think of me as your co-pilot, your friend, your eternal passenger. They drove through the night, Jennifer talking constantly. She spoke about highways Maria had never traveled, truck stops that didn't exist, other drivers she claimed to have ridden with. You're number 17, Jennifer said at one point. 17 drivers I've hitched with. Some of them lasted years before they finally broke. One man drove for 6 years with me in his passenger seat before he drove his truck off a bridge. Another woman made it 8 months before she quit trucking altogether. You seem strong though, Maria. I think you might last a while. Maria tried everything she could think of. She tried ignoring Jennifer. The passenger just talked louder or caused the radio to malfunction, or made the air conditioning blast freezing air until Maria acknowledged her. She tried reasoning with her. Jennifer just laughed and said reason didn't apply to things like her. She tried praying. Jennifer mocked her prayers and turned on the windshield wipers randomly. At a truck stop in Longview, Texas, Maria tried to get help. She walked into the convenience store and grabbed the attendant, babbling about the passenger in her truck, the thing that had attached itself to her. The attendant looked at Maria with concern and pity. Ma'am, are you feeling okay? Do you need me to call someone? Maria dragged the attendant outside to her truck, pointing at the passenger seat. Right there, do you see her? The passenger seat was empty. The attendant saw nothing, but Maria could see Jennifer clearly, sitting there, waving cheerfully. Like I said, Jennifer called out, though the attendant clearly heard nothing. Only you can see me. You look crazy to everyone else. The attendant gently suggested that Maria might need rest, might need to see a doctor. Maria realized that seeking help was useless. No one would believe her. No one could see what she saw. She drove on, Jennifer providing constant commentary. Through Dallas, through Fort Worth, into West Texas and New Mexico. Maria stopped trying to get rid of Jennifer and focused on completing her delivery. If she could just reach Seattle, drop off the medical equipment, maybe then she could figure out what to do. Maybe Jennifer would get bored and leave. Maybe this nightmare would end. But Jennifer showed no signs of leaving. She talked about her previous drivers with disturbing detail. The man who'd driven off the bridge, Jennifer described his final moments cheerfully, how he'd suddenly jerked the wheel and sent the truck plunging into a river. The woman who'd quit trucking, Jennifer explained how she'd broken her down psychologically over 8 months until the woman couldn't stand to be in a truck anymore. But she didn't escape me, Jennifer added. I visit her sometimes in her apartment. She can still see me, still hears me. You never really get rid of me, Maria. Maria stopped sleeping. Every time she tried to rest in the sleeper berth, Jennifer would wake her, talking loudly, or causing the truck's horn to honk, or making the lights flash. Maria became increasingly exhausted, surviving on coffee and energy drinks, her judgment deteriorating. She ran through red lights without noticing. She missed her exit in Albuquerque and had to backtrack. She nearly rear-ended another truck because she was too tired to brake in time. Jennifer seemed pleased by Maria's deterioration. You're braking faster than I expected. Most drivers make it at least a few weeks before they start falling apart. You might not make it to Seattle at all. Maria found herself talking back to Jennifer, engaging in conversations, because the alternative was silence and her own terrified thoughts. They discussed everything: Maria's childhood, her failed marriage, her relationship with her daughter, her regrets and fears. Jennifer absorbed it all, seeming to grow more substantial the more Maria shared. By the time they reached Idaho, Jennifer looked more solid, more real. Her presence in the cab felt heavier, more oppressive. Maria realized with horror that talking to Jennifer, acknowledging her, was feeding her somehow, making her stronger. But Maria was too exhausted and broken to stop. Jennifer had become her only companion, the only one who understood what she was experiencing. 4 days after leaving Atlanta, Maria arrived in Seattle. She delivered the medical equipment to the hospital loading dock, completing her assignment. She sat in her truck afterward, staring at Jennifer in the passenger seat. "I'm done," Maria said flatly. "The delivery is complete. You can leave now." Jennifer shook her head. "This delivery is done, but you'll have another one and another. And I'll be here for all of them, forever, Maria. I'm your passenger now, your permanent passenger." Maria Santos made one last delivery and then quit trucking. She couldn't do it anymore. Couldn't spend hours in the cab with Jennifer. Couldn't handle the isolation and the constant presence of something that shouldn't exist. She found a job as a warehouse supervisor in Seattle, work that kept her stationary, that didn't require driving. But Jennifer was right. Maria hadn't escaped. The passenger still visits, appearing in Maria's car when she drives to work, sitting in her apartment at night, present in reflections and shadows. Maria can still see her, still hears her voice. The other drivers Jennifer mentioned, the ones who broke, who quit, who crashed, they all tried to escape. None succeeded, because Jennifer isn't something you can escape from. She's what loneliness creates when it gets hungry enough. She's what manifests in the empty passenger seats of trucks driven by isolated people on endless highways. She's the price some drivers pay for spending too much time alone, too many in their own heads. Maria paid that price on June 18, 2021, when she made the mistake of being kind, of picking up a hitchhiker who wasn't what she seemed. Maria Santos learned that some passengers don't have destinations. They just ride forever, feeding on the company of their drivers, growing stronger the more they're acknowledged. And once they're invited in, they never leave. They're permanent passengers, companions for eternity, present even when invisible to everyone else. Maria still sees Jennifer. 13 years of driving has become a memory, but the passenger remains, sitting in the empty seat beside her, smiling that too wide smile, reminding Maria constantly that some mistakes can never be undone, that some passengers never reach their destination, because they never wanted a destination. They only wanted a driver who would never be alone again. And Maria gave Jennifer exactly that: eternal company, endless acknowledgement, permanent presence. The worst part, Maria sometimes thinks, is that Jennifer was telling the truth from the beginning. She really is tired of being Jennifer Watts, because she's been other people, other passengers in other trucks with other drivers. She's whoever she needs to be to get invited in. And once you invite her in, once you see her and acknowledge her and give her space in your reality, she never leaves. She can't leave. That's not how passengers like her work. They ride forever. And their drivers ride with them, seeing them when no one else can, hearing them when no one else does, trapped with a companion that only they know exists. That's the horror of the passenger who wouldn't leave. She's still there, always, forever, riding. Story 8. The Way Station Inspection. Robert "Bobby" Lawson had been driving commercial vehicles for 19 years, most recently running dedicated routes for a large logistics company operating in the northeastern United States. On December 4, 2020, he was hauling a load of consumer electronics from a distribution center in Newark, New Jersey, to a retail warehouse in Portland, Maine. The route was straightforward: Interstate 95 north through Connecticut, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and into Maine, approximately 360 miles. Bobby had driven this route at least once a week for the past 2 years. He knew every rest area, every notorious traffic bottleneck, and most importantly, every way station. Bobby left Newark at 6 a.m., hoping to beat rush hour traffic through New York and Connecticut. His International LT Series truck was running well, recently serviced, mechanically sound. The load was properly secured, his paperwork was in order, and his electronic logging device showed he had plenty of available driving hours. Everything was by the book. Bobby prided himself on compliance, maintaining a perfect safety record over 19 years. He never received a citation, never failed an inspection, never had any issues with DOT officers or state police. The morning drive went smoothly. Bobby navigated through Connecticut traffic, crossed into Massachusetts, and continued north. Around 10 a.m., somewhere near the Massachusetts-New Hampshire border, Bobby saw signs for an upcoming way station. He didn't remember this particular station. It wasn't on his usual mental map of I-95 facilities. But way stations were occasionally added or relocated, and Bobby wasn't overly concerned. The signs were standard blue and white, reading, "All commercial vehicles must enter." Bobby activated his turn signal and guided his truck onto the exit ramp leading to the way station. As he descended the ramp, he noticed the facility looked older than typical modern way stations. The building was concrete block construction, painted a faded gray, with only a few small windows. The scale area was covered by a metal canopy, and the whole facility had a dated, utilitarian appearance. Bobby drove onto the scale and came to a complete stop, waiting for the signal that would either wave him through or direct him to parking for inspection. The signal light stayed red. After a moment, a speaker crackled to life. "Proceed to parking area for Level 1 inspection." Bobby's stomach sank slightly. A Level 1 inspection was the most comprehensive. They'd check everything from his brakes to his cargo securement to his logbook. It could take an hour or more, but Bobby had nothing to hide. His truck was compliant, his paperwork was perfect. He'd passed the inspection without issues. He pulled into the designated parking area and shut off the engine. Two officers emerged from the way station building, both wearing uniforms that Bobby didn't quite recognize. They looked like DOT or state police uniforms, but the patches on the shoulders were unfamiliar, showing a symbol Bobby couldn't identify, something like a wheel inside a triangle or maybe an eye. Both officers were male, middle-aged, expressionless. They approached Bobby's truck with tablets in hand. Bobby rolled down his window. "Morning, officers. Level 1 inspection." The first officer nodded. "License, registration, medical card, and logbook." Bobby handed over the document. The officer examined them for a long moment, then said, "Exit the vehicle. Bring your manifest and bills of lading." Bobby complied, gathering his paperwork and climbing down from the cab. The inspection began normally enough. The officers checked Bobby's lights, brakes, tires, and coupling. They examined the cargo securement through the trailer's side door, verifying that the pallets of electronics were properly strapped. They measured his brake adjustment, checked for oil leaks, tested his emergency equipment. Bobby stood by, answering questions, providing additional documentation as requested. Everything was checking out perfectly, just as he'd expected. Then the first officer said something strange. "We need to inspect your auxiliary cargo area." Bobby was confused. "I don't have an auxiliary cargo area. It's just the main trailer, 53 feet standard." The officer looked at him with flat, emotionless eyes. "Your vehicle has an auxiliary cargo area. We need to inspect it now." Bobby shook his head. "Sir, I've been driving this truck for 3 years. There's no auxiliary cargo area, just the main trailer." The second officer spoke for the first time. "Are you refusing to allow inspection of your vehicle? That's a federal violation." Bobby felt the conversation slipping into dangerous territory. "I'm not refusing anything. I'm saying there's no auxiliary cargo area to inspect. You've seen the whole vehicle." The first officer walked to the back of Bobby's trailer and pointed at the rear doors. "Open the auxiliary access panel." Bobby followed him, looking at the doors. They were standard trailer doors, the kind he'd opened thousands of times. There was no auxiliary access panel. "Sir, those are just the main cargo doors. There's no panel." The officer's expression didn't change. "Open the auxiliary access panel located at the base of the right door." Bobby looked where the officer was pointing. At first, he saw nothing unusual, just the standard door frame and hardware. Then his perspective shifted slightly and he saw it. There was a panel about 2 feet square at the base of the right door. It was the same color as the door, almost invisible unless you knew to look for it. Bobby had never seen this panel before. It shouldn't exist. His trailer didn't have auxiliary compartments, but it was there. Bobby touched it. The panel was real metal, solid. There was a small handle recessed into the surface. The officer said, "Open it." Bobby's hand shook as he grasped the handle and pulled. The panel swung open on hinges, revealing a dark compartment about 2 feet deep. Bobby couldn't see what was inside. The interior was pitch black, darker than it should be, as if the absorbed light. "Remove the contents for inspection," the first officer instructed. Bobby leaned down, reaching into the compartment. His hand encountered something cold and metallic. He grasped it and pulled it out into the light. It was a metal box about the size of a shoebox, seamless with no visible way to open it. The surface was dull gray metal, slightly warm to the touch despite feeling cold initially. Bobby stared at it, completely bewildered. "I've never seen this before. I don't know what this is or how it got here." The second officer made a note on his tablet. "Unmanifested cargo. That's a serious violation." "What else is in the compartment?" Bobby looked back into the dark space. He could see shapes now, multiple objects. He reached in and pulled out another box, identical to the first, then another, then a fourth. He lined them up on the ground, 4 identical metal boxes, each seamless, each slightly warm, each completely inexplicable. The first officer examined the boxes without touching them. "Do you have documentation for these items?" Bobby's voice was rising with stress. "I don't have documentation because I didn't know they existed. I've never seen that compartment before, never loaded any boxes. My manifest only shows electronics in the main cargo area. This doesn't make any sense." The officers conferred quietly. Then the first officer spoke. "Unmanifested cargo is a federal offense. We're issuing citations and placing your vehicle out of service until this is resolved. You'll need to accompany us to the office for further questioning." Bobby felt panic rising. Out of service meant he couldn't drive, couldn't complete his delivery, would have his perfect record destroyed by something he didn't do and couldn't explain. "Please, there has to be a mistake. Can we call my company? Can we verify my load? I'm telling you I didn't load those boxes. I don't even know what they are." The second officer finally showed some expression, a slight smile that was more disturbing than his previous blankness. "We know exactly what they are. The question is whether you're going to admit to transporting them knowingly, or whether you're going to claim ignorance. Either way, you're in violation. Come with us." Bobby was led into the weigh station building. The interior was cold and poorly lit, with flickering fluorescent lights and concrete floors. The officers took him to a small room furnished only with a metal table and 3 metal chairs. They gestured for Bobby to sit. One officer remained in the room while the other left with Bobby's documents. For 30 minutes, Bobby sat in silence. The remaining officer didn't speak, didn't move, just stood by staring at Bobby with those flat, expressionless eyes. Bobby tried making conversation, asking questions about the process, requesting to call his company. The officer remained silent. Finally, the door opened and the second officer returned, carrying the metal boxes. He placed them on the table in front of Bobby. "Open them." Bobby examined the boxes closely. They had no seams, no hinges, no locks, no visible way to open them. "I can't. There's no opening mechanism." The officer slid one box toward Bobby. "We know you can open them. You loaded them. Open them now or we'll add failure to comply with inspection to your violations." Bobby picked up the box, turning it over, looking for any hidden catch or panel. His fingers found something, a slight depression on one surface. When he pressed it, the box split along an invisible seam and opened like a clamshell. Inside was nothing. The box was completely empty, lined with the same dull gray metal as the exterior. Bobby showed it to the officers. "It's empty, there's nothing inside." The first officer leaned forward. "That's because you delivered the contents already. Before you arrived here, that's why we're questioning you." Bobby's mind reeled. "Delivered contents before I got here? That's impossible. I drove straight from Newark to here. I haven't stopped except for fuel, and I never touched these boxes because I've never seen them before." The second officer opened the other 3 boxes. All empty, all lined with dull gray metal, all completely inexplicable. The officer said, "Your vehicle was flagged because our systems detected a completed exchange. Items were removed from these containers and transferred to another party. This happened somewhere between Newark and this location. You're going to tell us who received the items, where the exchange occurred, and what was contained in these boxes." Bobby stood up, anger overriding fear. I don't know what you're talking about. I drove straight here, didn't meet anyone, didn't transfer anything. These boxes don't exist, they can't exist. My trailer doesn't have an auxiliary compartment. This whole situation is insane." The officers looked at each other. The first one spoke. "You're claiming the boxes don't exist." Bobby grabbed one, holding it up. "I'm saying they shouldn't exist. I didn't load them. I don't have paperwork for them. They appeared in a compartment that wasn't in my trailer when I started this trip. Something is wrong here, but it's not something I did." The second officer stood. "Wait here." Both officers left the room, taking the boxes with them. Bobby heard a lock click. They'd locked him in. He was trapped in a cold, poorly room in a way station he didn't remember existing, being accused of transporting cargo that appeared in his vehicle by impossible means. Bobby checked his phone. No signal. He tried the door, locked solid. He was stuck. An hour passed, then another. Bobby shouted for someone to let him out, pounded on the door. No response. The fluorescent lights continued their irregular flickering. The room seemed to get colder. Bobby could see his breath now, fog in the air. That wasn't normal. The room had been cool but not freezing. Something was changing. The lights went out completely. Bobby stood in absolute darkness, disoriented and terrified. He heard a sound, machinery, rhythmic and mechanical, like gears turning or pistons pumping. The sound came from all around him, from the walls themselves. Bobby felt the floor vibrate slightly. The way station building was moving, or something inside it was operating. The lights came back on. Bobby blinked, adjusting. The room had changed. It was larger now, maybe twice the size it had been. The walls were different. Instead of painted concrete block, they were bare metal, dull gray like the boxes. And the boxes were there on the table, but there were more of them now. At least 20 boxes, all identical, all arranged in neat rows. The door opened. The officers entered, but they looked different. Their uniforms were the same, but their faces had changed. They were still expressionless, but now Bobby could see that their faces were wrong, too symmetrical, too perfect, like computer-generated faces or masks. They moved in perfect unison, their steps synchronized. "You're beginning to understand," the first officer said. His voice was the same, but now Bobby could hear an undertone, a mechanical quality. "The compartment exists because you're carrying what you've always been carrying. Every driver carries them. The boxes, the undefined cargo. The things that move through the highways without manifests or bills of lading." Bobby backed away. What is this place?" The second officer smiled, and Bobby saw that his teeth were all the same size and shape, perfectly uniform. "This is a processing center. We ensure that the undefined cargo reaches its destinations. Most drivers never see the compartments, never know what they're carrying. But occasionally, someone like you notices. When that happens, we have to explain. We have to make sure you understand the rules." "What rules?" Bobby's voice was barely a whisper. The first officer gestured at the boxes. "You will continue driving. You will continue carrying the undefined cargo. You will not speak of it to anyone. You will not attempt to open the compartments again. You will not deviate assigned routes. In exchange, you will not be processed. You will remain as you are, a driver, a carrier, a useful component. Break these rules and you will be processed like the cargo. Bobby wanted to ask what processed meant, but he was afraid of the answer. And if I refuse, if I quit driving? The second officer's smile widened impossibly, his mouth opening too far. You can't quit. You're already part of the system. The undefined cargo chose you 19 years ago. It's been riding with you in every truck, in every load. You've been carrying it all along without knowing. Now you know and you have a choice: cooperate or become cargo yourself. The room shook violently. Bobby fell to his knees. When he looked up, the officers were gone. The room was back to its original size, walls painted concrete block again. The table was empty, no boxes. Bobby tried the door. It was unlocked. He opened it and found himself in a normal way station office area. A female clerk looked up from her desk, surprised. "Can I help you?" Bobby stammered. The inspection, the officers." The clerk looked puzzled. "Sir, we haven't conducted any inspections today. The station just opened 15 minutes ago. Are you here to get weighed?" Bobby looked at a clock on the wall. It showed 10:30 a.m., the same time he'd entered the weigh station. No time had passed, or time had reset, or something impossible had happened to time itself. He fled. Bobby ran out of the building, across the parking area to his truck. It was sitting exactly where he'd parked it, looking untouched. Bobby climbed into the cab, started the engine, and drove back onto Interstate 95. No one stopped him. No one called him back. He continued north toward Portland, completing his delivery in a daze. When he unloaded the trailer in Portland, Bobby inspected the back doors carefully. There was no auxiliary access panel. The trailer was standard, normal, exactly as it had been when he'd loaded it in Newark. Bobby convinced himself he'd experienced a stress-induced hallucination, or perhaps he'd fallen asleep at a rest area and dreamed the entire weigh station incident. But Bobby Lawson never forgot the rules that the officers had told him. He continued driving for 3 more years, always professional, always compliant. But now he knew what he was really carrying. In every trailer, in every load, there were compartments he couldn't see and cargo he didn't load. The undefined cargo, moving through America's highways in the trucks of drivers who didn't know they were carriers. Bobby followed the rules. He didn't speak of it. He didn't try to find the compartments again. He didn't deviate from his routes. And in exchange, he remained a driver instead of cargo. But the knowledge haunted him. Every time he hooked up a trailer, every time he signed a manifest, every time he crossed a weigh station scale, Bobby wondered what he was really transporting. What moved through the hidden compartments, delivered to unknown recipients, part of a system that existed beneath the official logistics network. Bobby retired from trucking in 2023. He'd kept his perfect safety record, his perfect compliance history, but he kept the rules too. He never spoke about what he'd learned at that weigh station in December 2020. Not to his wife, his friends, his former colleagues. Because Bobby believed the officers when they said he was part of the system now. And systems don't forgive those who reveal their secrets. Sometimes Bobby sees trucks on the highway and wonders if those drivers know. If they've been to the processing center, if they've met the officers, if they've seen the undefined cargo. Most probably haven't. Most drivers go their entire careers never knowing what rides with them in the hidden compartments. But some, like Bobby, learn. And those drivers follow the rules. Because the alternative is becoming cargo themselves, processed, packaged, and delivered to destinations beyond comprehension. That's the horror of the weigh station inspection. Not the citations or the out-of-service orders or the federal violations. The real horror is learning that your truck carries more than you knew, that you're part of something larger and darker than commercial logistics. That every driver is unknowingly transporting things that shouldn't exist to places that aren't on maps for purposes that can't be questioned. Bobby learned this, and now he lives with the knowledge. The undefined cargo is still moving. The processing centers are still operating. The system is still running, and drivers are still carrying their hidden loads, manifest or not, aware or not. Bobby was just unlucky enough to become aware. And awareness in the world of the undefined cargo is the worst violation of all. Because once you know, you can never forget. And you can never stop carrying. The undefined cargo chose you, and it never lets you go.